Good afternoon, everyone. The clock on the wall says it is 6 o'clock. So does my iPhone. So I will call the September 26th meeting of the Bastrop City Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Would you please call the roll?
Debbie Moore.
Here.
Patrick Connell.
Here.
Cynthia Meyer.
Here.
Matt Lassen.
Here.
Cheryl Lee.
Present.
Greg Sherry.
Here.
Tom Dawson.
Present.
Pablo Cerna.
Here.
Thank you very much. We do have a quorum, and we will move on to item number 2, citizen comments. This is a section if someone wants to speak on an item that is not on the agenda, that you would fill out a comment card now. Do we have any citizen comment cards, Viviana? Ms. Hamilton?
None at this time, Madam Chair.
Then we will skip on to the next item, items for consideration, for individual consideration. Item 3A, we're going to consider to action to approve the minutes from the August 27th special meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. We've all had a chance to read them. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve as is.
Second. Motion moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Item 3B, consider action to appoint a Planning and Zoning Commission member as its representative on the Historic Landmark Commission. Who is, Matt, you're the current person, right?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Would you like to continue?
I would.
Would anyone like him not to continue?
Non-confrontational.
Non-confrontational. Do I have a motion to reappoint Mr. Lassen?
Make a motion to reappoint Matt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No. Okay. At this point, we're going to take the agenda in a little bit different direction. I can't believe that the folks that are here tonight are here to see Matt reappointed, although it's a great and glorious thing, and we appreciate his service. So I think that the people that are here tonight are interested mainly in one of 3 things: zoning on Main Street, LCRA property, and the Iredell map. Given, I see lots of nods. And I apologize to the folks that are next on the agenda, but we're going to deviate from the agenda for right now to serve the people that are here. And Matt, Mr. Jones, you're going to give a presentation on these 3 items, I believe. And some people were concerned because they didn't see these 3 individual items listed per se on the agenda, but they are contained in this beast, and it's a part of it, so that's why they weren't listed individually. But Matt, would you please take us further?
Yeah, so thank you, Chair, Commissioners, good evening. We are, as our Chair stated, moving on to 3F on the agenda, which is the public hearing and consider action on recommendation of the Bastrop Building Code, B3, the B3 Technical Manual, and the Pattern Book, and forward to the October 8th City Council meeting. So wanted to go ahead and jump out in front of a couple of items that have come up through public input meetings and other comments and some things of that nature that staff has received over the last several weeks. So the first one being the P4, Place Type 4 on Main Street. It was originally envisioned that Main Street north of downtown would go to a P4 mixed-use district to allow flexibility within the code. So everybody that was on Main Street did receive a letter that said they would be going from a P3 to a P4. Since that time, we've had the public input meeting, and we received a lot of feedback at that meeting. We've received a lot of citizen comment forms. We've provided the comment forms that we've received to date as of 3 o'clock for you to take a look at tonight. From the citizens, yes, that's right, 145 of them. But given light of what we've learned in the feedback from the community through the response forms and through the input meeting that we had last week, staff is going to recommend that we go back to a like-to-like zoning at this time. So if you were a single-family residence, we're going to propose that it be P3, not P4. I will say there's like an exception to that. Tracy's, for example, is there today. We will not downzone them to a P3. We'll recommend that stay P4. But everything else along Main Street, if you're single family today, we're going to recommend to P&Z and Council that it stay P3. That's just given the amount of feedback. We want everybody to know we're listening. That's why we have those meetings. We heard you. And so for those reasons, staff's going to recommend that go back to P3. Any questions on that? Comments?
We have some folks that have signed up since we had these. We can either go through all three, or does that satisfy the folks that are here for P4? Does anybody still want to speak on that issue? It would be the staff recommendation, and its recommendation from me as chair, and I haven't polled the
So I would say if
commission.
they want to speak.
That's for Main
Yeah,
Street,
so
correct.
I would say if they want to speak, we're still going to hold the public hearing.
Correct, yeah.
Speak-
I will
speak
formally
during
do
the
that.
public hearing.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
You got it.
So the Iredell District, there seems to be a lot of questions and comments and concerns on that as well. So I wanted to walk through that and explain why we did that and the reasoning behind it, and what that means moving forward with the overlay district of the Iredell. So today in the city of Bastrop, we regulate what building materials you can use within our city limits. We do that for several reasons, life safety being one. The International Fire Code, Building Code takes all that into consideration. Some are just regulations for the character of the neighborhood and aesthetic purposes. But given recent legislation that came in, the state now said that we no longer have the ability to regulate building materials within the city limits of Bastrop, with a few exceptions, one of those being if you are within a historic district. So looking at that and looking at the Iredell map that dates back to 1920, so almost 100 years old, and the historic relevance that has to the city of Bastrop, in an effort to maintain the integrity and the character of that area, and in an effort to protect materials, protect property rights, and be able to regulate materials, which we do today. So it won't be anything different than what we're doing today. It'll just give us the ability to do today once this is adopted. I do want to put a couple of points of clarity. If you're in the Iredell district, you will not have to get a certificate of appropriateness if you are not a nationally designated landmark or state designated landmark. So it would be no different from the process today. You would do a building permit, we would check it for materials, and then it would be approved administratively at a staff level. Similar to a commercial project, we review building materials today. The approval of this overlay district would just give us that ability to do that in the future. So it doesn't change anything from what we're doing today. It just gives us the ability to do that into the future. So if you're not a nationally designated landmark or within the nationally designated district, which is along Main Street from, I believe, Farm, I want to say the Spring. If you're not within that district, you do not have to get a certificate of appropriateness from the HLC. So I wanted to hopefully clear that up. So again, it just gives us the ability to regulate building materials only, like we have the ability to do today, or before the state legislator said that we could not. And it's just in an effort to, protect life safety and protect the integrity of that neighborhood. Any questions on that? Okay. I know there are probably questions behind me, and we'll certainly get there. Don't get me wrong. I just wanted to try to give some points of clarification, and any specific questions that people have tonight we'll certainly address. A third thing that has come to the attention is the LCRA property. We've received several comments on that from residents. So the LCR property today is zoned neighborhood tourism. As we all know, our current zoning classifications that we have today, we will not have with the adoption of the B3 codes. So neighborhood tourism zoning is not an option because it will not exist with the adoption of the B3 code. So the options are
Doesn't mean the function won't be there. It's just nomenclature will change.
That's exactly correct. Your options are the place types, and out of the place types, the P4 district, which is what it's recommended going to right now, is the most appropriate district. It only allows commercial in house form. A lot of the structures out there are in house form today. You cannot have a more intensive use than that, so you couldn't build your standard, what you would think of a commercial building like on Main Street or in other areas of the town. A commercial within P4 can only occur within house form, so it looks like a house. So it could function as like a cafe or something, for example, as long as it looks like a house. I think that's the reality of where it is. Neighborhood tourism just will not exist, and the place type of the P4 is what it is essentially today, and so that's the reasoning behind the P4, rather than it going to a more intensive P5. And you can't go to a P3 because that it's got commercial uses allowed there today. So to go to a strictly neighborhood, we would not recommend doing that. So for those reasons, it's P4, and again, it's just because of going based off what the uses are allowed there today.
So if we required them to be a P3, let me back up. A lot of that property, am I correct, is in the floodplain, so it cannot be developed any
Yes,
more
ma'am.
than
A lot of it has a lot
in
of
the parking lot down on the
has
river
some
bottom.
topography challenges, has some floodplain challenges, so it's a challenging piece of property.
Okay, is there a limitation as to the non-pervious ground cover that can
Yes, ma'am.
can be there? So any buildings that are constructed there after today would have to meet whatever limitations?
That's correct. Just like any other property within the P4, this property is not special. We're treating them just like every other property. And there are impervious cover limits in the B3 codes for P4, which they would have to adhere to. Same with building type, building placement, everything that's in the code would apply to them.
Okay, if neighborhood tourism didn't go away and it stayed neighborhood tourism, what could be constructed there today?
I'd have to go back and look. Several things.
But it would still have to be in house form?
No.
No, we just did that on one, but it didn't work. Okay. I'm getting my P3s and my 4s mixed
Right.
up with what we've done in the past.
Yeah, P3,
So-
the house form is,
We would be limiting them, whoever bought the property, taking away some of the things that they can do right now they couldn't do if we were in a P3?
yes, ma'am, that's correct. Yes.
It'd be a downgrade to their
It would
current
be a
usage.
down zoning, and legal can chime in on that, but that's a no-no.
It's a no-no?
Correct, that we wouldn't legally be allowed to downzone them.
It's illegal.
Will you repeat it one more time
Can
into
you
the mic? They
repeat
didn't
that?
hear it.
Oh, sure. Yes, it's not legal to downzone them. So we need to maintain at least the zoning classification and qualifications that they have.
You cannot take away something they previously have. Right.
And that leaves us with only P4 as the minimum place
Yes.
type then for this particular
That's right.
property, correct?
Now, they still have an opportunity, just like everybody else does, to come to us and say they want different, but that has not occurred.
Do you have anything else on these 3 items?
I don't on those specifically, unless we
Okay.
have anything else.
Well, stand by.
All right.
Stand by. Because what I'd like to do at this time is skip to 3F, open the public hearing, and anyone that wants to speak on these 3 items. Is that okay?
Would you like
Is that
to hear
okay?
the staff presentation first?
We can do that. Thank
Okay.
you, sir.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Go for it.
Okay. So this is the agenda item for the B3 code, the B3TM in the pattern book. So I just want to take a little bit to kind of go back in time and take a look at the journey we've taken the past year. I want to applaud you all, the amount of work that you all have put in on your end to review codes, to attend workshops, to attend the pop-ups, to attend all the public input meetings that we've had at the opera houses and on Main Street and other. Really, your dedication to this process has been refreshing to see, and it's been great to be a part of that and working with you all as we've gone through this. So we've been working on this for a little over a year now. It's evolved in some ways, but I think going back to the policy statement that council gave us, and that's a fiscally sustainable Bastrop, authentic Bastrop, and geographically sensitive. I think that we have kept that as our guiding principles throughout this journey together. And short story is, whenever things have come up, I think you all have done a good job when we've had some discussions. I will say we've had some spirited discussions, but you all have always done a good job of keeping that in mind. And I think that's an important thing. And I think the end product will be a code that accomplishes those three things, and I think that's important to note. With this, and one thing that I do want to note too, and it's been very important to council, is that we want these codes to be a living document, to be a working document, and they're intended to be that way. What we don't want to happen is to get in a situation we found ourselves in last year, and we had codes that haven't been refreshed, haven't been updated, they've been amended, they don't work well, they're conflicting. We don't want to ever wind up there again. So council has made it very important from every process, whether it be the technical manual, which is going to be required to be reviewed by the DRC annually, just like y'all review the comprehensive plan, the B3 codes and the policy statement will be reviewed annually as part of the policy that council's adopted to make sure that these codes stay fresh. So I want to point that out, that these are a working document, and they're very much a living document that we will work with. DRC might recommend changes, staff might recommend changes, and that's okay, and we recognize that going into it. The other thing I want to point out too is it's very much the B3 code in essence is a guiding document that establishes regulations that P&Z and council have said that are okay in the community. So the guidelines in the B3, what they do is give administrative approval to staff to have flexibility within the code. And that's what that is. So just because something may not exist within the document today, that's okay. Doesn't mean you cannot do it. There are processes, warrants, variants, and other things, zoning requests that there's options for people. It doesn't mean they can't do it. It just means they have to come have a conversation with P&Z and council first. So I wanted to keep that in mind. I think that's very important. So this document gives staff the approval to go out and do administratively what the P&Z and council has said that it's okay to do. So with kind of getting there, we will go ahead and get, oh, sorry about that. Colin, can you pull up the other presentation, please? Is Matt? So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Mr. Matt Lewis with Simple City, and we'll start on the presentation. So Matt and I will kind of jump back and forth on this through some of it, and please feel free to ask any questions. But with that, Mr. Matt Lewis.
Matt, before you get started, we do have some chairs up front here if anybody would like to come and sit down.
About 8 chairs I see up front. You can sit down.
Good evening, Commission Chair. Matt Lewis with Simple City Design. We have been on a long journey, and we're excited to be here tonight to go over the codes with you all. This journey started out with a vision and some direction from the City Council about creating a timeless, a community that represents its authenticity and that creates a place that is that will evolve over time without having to modify the code over and over again as we've done in the past. And we've been really mindful of being true to that. The citizens and the community members that were engaged and participated throughout this project will notice a lot of the standards and recommendations that they had wanted to see into their regulations in the city are integrated into this. Communities are created and governed by the codes that they use to govern land uses and zoning, subdivision design, building codes, local amendments to the building codes. And all of these characteristics and regulations are reflective in the outputs, the development patterns that you see going on in your communities. We started back by doing an analysis of the DNA in the downtown. That was the original direction, is to extract the character which makes up the places that we know and that we love. So that this isn't an abstract exercise, but rather a reflection of the community back to the community, and then write the standards around those community reflections and modernize them as we have been evolving over time. The streets downtown were designed with horse and buggies. They were measured in Veris, which is a wagon wheel turn, right? Now we're at a point where we're pondering autonomous vehicles and who knows what's next and beyond that. What the framework of downtown Bastrop and the framework of this community has created has been timeless, and it's proven to evolve over time. The uses inside of the buildings come and go, whether it be restaurants, shops, IT offices, blockbuster videos, right? And now who knows what the future's having, and we're shifting in our economy more rapidly now than we ever have before. Our access to information is more readily available at our fingertips. We know constantly what's going on, and what we're trying to do with these codes is to reflect back to the heritage and the authenticity which created Bastrop. We did this through an interactive and collaborative process. We tried to make it as fun as city planning and writing codes can be. And we did it through engaging illustrators and renderers to come in. We had architects, urban designers, city planners, engineers. Let's look at the drainage. Let's study the patterns that are getting created based on the codes that we have on the books today. What works, what doesn't work? What can carry forward, what needs to be replaced? What can be modified and carried forward so that the reflection was already there? The codes that were on the books took a lot of hard work, and there was a lot of effort that went into the form-based code. we read and studied those elements and carried those forward so that we could integrate them in as components of this code as we went forward. As we're going through this, we're going to go at a very high level. We're going to introduce the concepts and the components of the code, and then we'll get down into how everything fits together, the process, how applications get filed. We're going to go through an infill site, which means that it's a development within an existing neighborhood, and then we're going to go over what's called a greenfield site, or a brand new development, or the creation of a new neighborhood. And we'll go through how it functions within the city, how the flow chart goes for the applicants, engineers, as well as for the community, so that they'll know what time they have the ability to come to public hearings like this. I also want to praise the amount of turnout that you've had. I don't know if it was because of the double or triple notices that got sent that generated this, but when you have engaged community members, this is what creates true democracy in our nation. This is a reflection of people being engaged and excited, upset, challenged, curious about what's going on in their community, and this is what it's going to take to resolve our communities. All right, I'll leave that alone. As we're going through this, though, we think about the state of Texas. We're in the pro-property rights state. We tried to really balance that. The place types in the new B3 code are metrics. They're standards that create certain built patterns, certain forms. The imperial portion of the code is the International Building Code. It's the minimum standards that's established at an international level that all cities are governed to, that you can't go lower than. We often say that the International Building Code will get you a D-. It'll build you just safe enough so that it's a habitable structure. What we wanted to do is get that habitable structure and make it authentic to Bastrop, and so we believe that we've coded this community to a B+, and we believe that Bastrop deserves a B+ and more, and therefore what we've done is made it so that the development community, or not necessarily the development community, someone that wants to build a house can come in here and build a quality home, integrate it into a neighborhood, or maybe they want to live in a place where they can live above their shop, where there are certain places in the community we're recoding that back in. And we believe that we've been very strategic and mindful of where the existing fabric would allow for those types of transitions and where it would not. Some of the bold ideas that got forward, Matt's already addressed with the P4 going up Main Street. That's since been recalled, and maybe that was the proper move, but it deserved a community conversation. It sparked a community conversation, which hopefully will keep people that engage based off of that one slip up, if you will, that could become new planning commissioners, or really understand how this impacts them on a day-to-day lives and is reflective of their lives in Bastrop. So I just want to state that, and I apologize for my voice. I'm just getting over a cold, so cough just a bit. When we began this process, we started out by thinking through a variety of housing types and how this would evolve over time. Many community members were involved in the rodeos. We had a design rodeo, a code rodeo, a final rodeo, transportation rodeos, where we talked about our transportation networks, the systems of how things are going to flow. Thanks, Matt. And one of your citizens noted, after reading the entire code, he stated, "You've written this code to create neighborhoods." And that's what he extracted from reading the code from page to page, rather than just residential subdivisions. And the thought is that it integrates the ability for people to have proximity, close proximity to services, so that they have the ability to drive, walk, bike to a grocery store, nail salon, cafe, bookstore, some type of third place that they would have the ability to linger or gather at in close proximity to their neighborhoods. Throughout the testing and writing of this code, the conversations that were held challenged our teams to challenge our paradigms of what we knew about zoning and what we knew about conditional use permits and subdivision plats. And we went through a series of iterations to get us to the point that we've gotten to tonight. And it challenged our entire team at a national level to think about how cities develop into the future and how we can make it as light as possible without over-regulating for arbitrary or capricious reasons. And we believe that we've accomplished that through this document. The illustration you have up on the screen is a design of a neighborhood. This is a real tract of land that we communicated with the landowner that we wanted to design. And what the intent was to articulate all 5 place types in one neighborhood, just to show what the possibilities of it could be. You know, what if and how might we actually design a neighborhood that has very high-end housing and manufactured housing in close proximity to each other, right? What if they have live-work units, townhomes, and apartment buildings in close proximity to residential homes, and what may it look like? So we designed this neighborhood, and then we had an illustrator actually watercolor and draw the neighborhood in perspective, showing an aerial view looking down into it. So you'll notice in the foreground you have very intense buildings. Those are 5 or 6 story buildings, and they're ground floor retail with residential overhead. And in Bastrop, maybe people want to live in that type of lifestyle, and we've coded it to say, well, that would be okay in certain locations. And you'll notice as in the background, it transitions back into detached residential houses. And so what it would provide is a series of small blocks about 330 feet by 330 feet, which is the exact dimensions of your downtown blocks you have today, in a particular order so that you could integrate a variety of building types in close proximity without creating negative impacts or detrimental impacts into the structures of the structure types, right? So the intensity increases as the number of P goes up. And we'll get into more in depth in that in just a minute here. Here's a view showing what it would look like on the ground level. This is what's called a pocket neighborhood or a courtyard neighborhood. It allows for the houses to front a central green. You'll notice there's no vehicular traffic into the central area, and that the driveways and the garages are located on the peripheral of the neighborhood. Currently, you can't really build this in Bastrop. You can't build this in most communities in the state of Texas. They've been coded out because the subdivision regulations or the zoning regulations don't allow for these housing types. Well, in this B3 code, we've coded them back in and made it to where in the appropriate locations you could build these types of products. Here's another type of housing scenario. This one's a little bit more intense. It has some single-family houses or detached P3 houses to some a commercial building or a shop house or live-work unit integrated into it. We're showing what if you had some P4 and P3 mixed together, what it may look like. And maybe some new neighborhoods want to come forward and actually design their neighborhoods to allow for this. Maybe it is appropriate in certain infill areas, maybe it's not. Those are the types of conversations that can be determined through this process. So as we look into this, the place types fit together, and they are characterized alongside street types. Each individual lot in the city, each house or building or commercial structure fronts a street. And so what we've done is we've created a series of street networks that would represent the intensity of development patterns that would go along with them. We kept all of the street types that we created to the exact dimensions that you have in downtown Bastrop and throughout Bastrop, 55.5 feet of right-of-way, and for the more intense zones, up to 80 feet of right-of-way, which is very typical for a commercial section for a street. We introduced new block types. We studied what is the original Bastrop block. You all have a very unique type of environment here with the way that the community was originally founded, the way that the lots were oriented downtown. The Pete's is one of my favorite buildings. It's a 1,072 square foot lot with a 1,000 square foot building on it. It's a tiny building, but that lot dimension wasn't allowed in any of your existing zoning codes. But what if someone had a little bit of money and wanted to buy a little bit of a lot and build a little bit of a building? We've reintegrated those types of allowances back into the code, and we think that that's really important for the evolution of Bastrop as the market shifts, as housing trends shift, and we believe that we've done it in a way that's going to respect the authenticity of the community. Next, everything will be regulated by building types. And so each place type has a series of building types that would be appropriate in it. And it goes from least intense to more intense. And so we'll go into the individual details and the development standards that coincide with those details as we go through this effort. The intent of the code is stated pretty early. I think it's on the 5th or 6th page of the document. And it links back to the direction we were given through the policy statement. Create a Bastrop that is fiscally sustainable, which means that the amount of infrastructure that is being paid for by the tax dollars can be reassumed by the development that's taking place, meaning that the development doesn't cost more than the taxpayers are paying for the infrastructure to provide services for those individual characteristics. And we believe that with the variety of building types, the variety of block types, the variety of street types, that can be achieved in a wide variety of patterns without having detrimental development occur. To be geographically sensitive, Bastrop has a very unique soil topology. It's got lost pines, it has blackland prairies, it's got Texas hill country, and all of these geographies collide right here along the Colorado River. And what we've done is we've created a variety of development patterns that would be appropriate in the different types of geography. To be sensitive about the loblolly pines, and to be sensitive about the Houston toad habitat. And the patterns of development that are allowed within those districts may not be appropriate for areas along 71, for example. It's a different context. And what we've done throughout this document is coded the context of the natural environment and the existing environment so that they work together in partnership and rather than being in conflict with each other, so that you don't have to have variances and public hearings and constant zoning changes and you have all of these requests to waiver around the code because the codes weren't written to match the context of the natural environment. So we'll go through those development patterns here shortly. And then the ability to maintain the authenticity of Bastrop. We believe we captured that. I think I've stated it numerous times, and it will be stated more. As we were going through this code, we were well in creating a very streamlined process where concurrent reviews for development submittals would happen and that development would flow very rapidly through the process if they met the intent. If they did not meet the intent or the standards of the code, they're coming before the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council to have a conversation with the public here as well to have that dialogue. Due to House Bill 3167, we had to revamp the process. We have a 30-day shot clock that was added. It made us go back and rewrite all of the development process, back to the process that we have here. And I believe Matt covered this a little bit.
And will you just explain the 30-day clock just ever so slightly more so that everybody kind of
Oh, yes, sir.
understands it?
I'll take that one, yeah. So specifically what that means, and more directly what that means, is the state has now said that we have to, does not give us a choice, approve development plans, land development plans, public improvement plans, subdivision plats within 30 days. That does not mean 30 days of review. That means it has to get to the approving authority of that municipality within 30 days, or it is deemed approved. What it also did was say that the burden of proof, if you do deny something, lies with the city. So we literally had to go and codify every checklist, every process, go back, and this was done on October 27th, and revamp the entire process, because the state says with that House Bill 3167 is that you must approve a plan within 30 days. So we've gone back. Some of the things are now administratively approved, or plats, for example, just go to P&Z now. We've done submittal schedules for every type of submittal that you would submit to the planning department. We will now process every case that we get within 24 to 25 days. And that's from the time you submit it until the time it receives that approval. So the 3167, it's called the shot clock bill because we do only have 30 days, or else it is just deemed approved.
And that, I can't emphasize enough what damage could be done with a 30-day, or it's approved,
Yes,
time clock, because it would take away our ability. We couldn't function the way we do now as far as approval for developments or denial for developments. And what we're fighting so hard for is to keep our Bastrop, even though we know we're growing. Houston doesn't have codes, and look what's happened there. We don't want that. So what they've had to do is, in the middle of writing all of this over a year, after that piece of legislation passed, they had to go back and look at all of their timelines. And that's why we now have certain dates that we'll have meetings to accept plans. If they're not complete, they're not deemed accepted, and they're not going to be accepted until they have all documents that our planning department needs. So that was an important piece of legislation that I don't know what they were thinking when they passed that one.
It certainly had some unintended consequences, but the way development is set up now through this flow chart is in direct correlation and response to that legislation from House Bill 3167.
And again, Commission, just to reiterate, we really did have to go back and amend the code to be reflective of this process. The code had to be rewritten based off of the procedural provisions that were being created by the staff and the checklist. And it's more than just planning. These are engineering documents, head wall designs, infrastructure of looking at how many cubic feet of water they're projecting to change when they change the direction of the natural grades. All of those things have to be approved in a really quick manner. And so what we've done is created a process alongside the staff to match that. And I'll go through this pretty briefly, and I have another slide of this again. So again, I'm taking you at a high level, and then I'll take you back down into the details. So I've got a slide of this again later we'll go through. Next.
It's available online also.
Yes, ma'am. Next, about 90% of your development standards and your allowances for your individual properties are contained within charts. Rather than having to read 600 pages of code to know what you need to do, we put all of your standards into one chart. And so you could go to this chart and say, I'm a place type 3. Place type 3 is basically a residential zone. It's only for residents. It's only for detached residential structures. That's all that's allowed within that zone type. So you could go into this chart and find out all of the standards of how much impervious cover or lot coverage you're allowed, where your buildings could go, what type of buildings, where your setbacks go. And we wrote this to be as flexible as possible so that the standards would take into account as many site conditions as possible. Let's say that you have a lot that's a typical lot, 60 feet by 110 feet, and there's a beautiful oak tree at the 25-foot mark, right? So you can now move your building around so that you can actually preserve trees rather than having a uniform area of where your building must go. Your old code said you had to have 25-foot setbacks, 5-foot side yards, 35-foot rear yards. And you can see those patterns in the areas that were built under that development code. Every house has the exact same frontage. It starts in the exact location, which was not very true to the way that Bastrop created. In the downtown area or in areas surrounding, the buildings generally moved around on the lots based on where there was trees, where there was flooding, where there wasn't flooding. You know, any of the, maybe there's fence rows of trees, those types of things, and you could move the buildings. We reintegrated those standards back to allow for a little bit more flexibility and movability of the lots on the individual sites. And these standards are now in the code. It's about 3 pages. It's a 3-page document on the chart, but it goes over the, let me see, I can zoom in here, sorry. Your block perimeters. And so Bastrop was created based off of farm lots, and farm lots were 720 feet by 720 feet, and then they got transitioned into building blocks, and so essentially one farm lot breaks into 4 building blocks, and so you could have 4 building blocks at 330 feet for 330 feet. That pattern carried forward throughout this document. Excuse me. This also has your street types based on place type, your civic space, which is your parks and those types of gathering locations. You have the encroachments of, like, if you want a front porch or if you want a dooryard, if you want to have a stoop, and where those are allowed. And then it goes through all the way through lot coverage, as well as your signage is all captured in here. So the sign types you're allowed in the different place types, and then all of the individual details we go through, all the way down to public lighting. So everything that you need to create human settlements is captured within this code. It's a lot. You look at turn radiuses of streets, spacing of trees, street lighting, curb dimension, lane widths. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And every element that is required to build human settlements is captured within these documents. And so all within that chart. Now I'm going to take you through the place types. These are your zoning districts. And so that's just a new type of name for it. Place type zoning districts rather than conventional zoning districts where you regulate individual uses. This regulates building types, building forms, and the characteristics of buildings in order to allow for flexibility so that Tracy's could be recreated. Tracy's would be considered a P4 structure. It's small form structure integrated into a neighborhood on a corner. That would be an example. This chart is also online. It's a direct correlation of your translation. So every zoning district that you had in your existing code, we did a direct translation to the new place type. And so any zoning classification that was existing was translated through this chart and is reflective on the place type map for the new place type rezonings. And here's the new place type map. It's much cleaner than your previous map. It flows better, it's orderly, and it creates orderly development patterns that would allow for evolution of time and to create timeless places, just like Bastrop is familiar with. And here's the place types broken down so that we can really get a deeper level of understanding what it is. P1 is nature. You go in and you go out. You know, there's wild animals in nature. It's not a very habitable place, and we put light footprints in it. You may build trails in nature, but generally it's a natural area. Rural development. Some people like to live in rural development, and we say that should be allowed in Bastrop, and so it's coded in. These are sparsely settled lands that either has agricultural uses or people that want to have large lots or land, acreage, and so we coded in rural development. Next is P3. It's neighborhood. It's your residential districts, and so, sorry, this is being finicky. Well, it's not letting me zoom in again. Oh, there it is. So anyhow, you can notice the patterns, and so you see now you've got lots in orderly development, just really standard to a neighborhood. Next is P4. In P4, this is where you start to integrate. It's primarily residential, and it allows for primarily residential uses and building types. So it allows for detached structures, residential structures, attached residential structures, and live-work structures, or ground floor office or retail on the ground floor, but again, in house form. It has to be in house form types of structures. P5 is downtown Main Street. It is in the downtown area. We capped it at, I believe, 3 stories. 3-story max. You can't build over 3 stories. In some of the other areas, it can go up to 5. So maybe along Highway 71, that could be an appropriate level of buildings. And so it's up to 5 stories. Let's say that you have a hotel that comes to town that wants to go above that. They would need to be coming to ask you all for permission to go above those types of elevations. Next is employment center. Employment centers are for job creations. Amazon comes to town or someone like that, and maybe you all want them to come to town, then they would go in an employment center zone, and the city staff and the applicant would work together to write the level of standards. In order to provide some standards, I'm talking fast, it's a long presentation, but so hopefully this is all making sense. But in order to provide some level of standards for existing employment centers or industrial areas, those are the translation areas, we allowed for the block to be based off of 720-foot scales, and we wrote the P5 standards to be integrated into the base standards for employment centers. So it emulates those patterns, but it doesn't conform to P5. Generally, you may have more larger parking lots. The buildings may be larger, a little bit oriented differently, and so those are employment centers. Next, you have civic space. These are your gathering spaces, your libraries, your schools. They're places that are civic buildings and civic spaces for people to gather. And so that's the last place type. And everything in the code is organized by lot structure. Each building in the city is placed on a lot, whether it's commercial, residential, high-rise, low-rise. And so here's the parameters of how lots get broken down. We created a first layer of the lot, and depending on the intensity of the lot or the development, the first layer will shift forward or backwards. If it's a residential house, maybe they want to bring have a shallower front yard and have a larger backyard. We've coded that in. If you have a large lot that's over half an acre or a quarter acre, then you can push the house up to 60 feet back from the right-of-way. You still want to have a street edge that creates a uniform look, but we created as much allowances for movable buildings on the lot as possible. And rather than hard coding standards for side setbacks like you previously had, we deferred to health, safety, and welfare. We went back to the International Building Code and said, let's let that regulate rather than writing arbitrary standards. It will create a safe environment without negative attributes on the side yards. And so you'll notice in the code, everything says IBC building separation. That's the International Building Code separation requirements for minimum separation. The second layer of the lot will always be 20 feet, and it's where parking gets introduced. And so the second layer is 20 feet back, starting from the rear of the first layer. And the first layer, again, is a movable layer, just so it moves based off of the intensity of the building. The third layer is the backyard, and whatever happens in the backyard stays in the backyard, right? And so we said backyards, it's the backyard. And so the third layer is deep or as shallow as the individual property owner would like. Here are the street types. So we've coded a variety of street types in. There's 12 types of streets coded in. The majority of the streets will have street trees, which create shade. The number one thing that came back out of your comprehensive plan was people wanted to be able to walk. Well, if you have shade trees, then people have the ability to walk. Has drive lanes, and you'll notice here this is like a kind of intense housing type. The porches come right up to the street edge, and it's got sidewalks. And so we did design speeds of 20, and there's a lot of nerdy details in there I won't get into. It would take all night. Sure, I'll keep rolling. I can tell. Yes, ma'am. All right. There's another street section. Again, we did match all of the patterns of downtown. We emulated some of the streets that you had so that they could be integrated out throughout the community. It's another 55.5. Here's one in a more intense zone. Now you're in a P5 district. You'll notice the buildings got more intense, and there's the street type. Here's one that is 80 foot of right-of-way that allows for a boulevard up to the center, and maybe it can become like a hike and bike trail that interconnects new neighborhoods, those types of things. So we just created a variety of elements to it. And so here's some visual aids of the place types. P1 is nature, P2 is rural. There's some renderings that we did that show what a farm looks like, and this is what a rural development may look like. P3 is residential. It allows for edge yard buildings. And again, you can look at the the individual standards on the development charts that are in the code. And those development charts, again, cover about 90% of the elements of the code. All of the text of the code just iterates the requirements of those individual development standards, why they're important, and explains the intent of why they're important. P4, you'll notice that the building types go up. And we're introducing one building type that's a new type of building type that is really common in Charleston, South Carolina. It was actually called the Charleston side yard. And it's for people that want to push their building to the side yard, and instead of having a big front yard or backyard, their porches can front sideways. And at the street edge, it has a door that opens up at the street edge onto their porch. It's a really unique product. They built it throughout Charleston. It's one of the greatest cities in the nation. And we coded them in here that maybe someone would like to have the ability to do that in the appropriate location. And then courtyard buildings. And maybe you want the ability to have a courtyard house where your house takes up the major perimeter of the lot, and you have a central green inside your house rather than a front or backyard. It's coded in as a possibility. Maybe no one will use it. Maybe it will become a product that you all like. Maybe it becomes a product you don't like and you want to modify the code and take them out later. That would be the prerogative of the commission and the council. P5, again, is your main street downtown Bastrop. You have the side yard building would be allowed. The courtyard buildings would be allowed. You'll notice that the edge yard buildings, which is a house form structure, goes away. Those are no longer allowed in this because it would be out of context with the scale of the neighborhood. And so you're trying to create the differentiation of areas. And rear yard buildings. Rear yard buildings are where the building is brought up to the street edge, like walking down downtown Main Street at Chestnut and Main. The buildings come up to the street, parking goes in the rear, and so those buildings are integrated back into the code so that those would be allowable as well. Employment center. These are where larger buildings take up, they don't meet the individual standards that are governed throughout the code. Civic space. Instead of just having parks and playgrounds, we integrated several options for civic space. large parks, central greens, squares, plazas, hardscape plazas, commercial plazas on corners, courtyards, and those types of elements are now integrated in. So as a new community comes in, they could select a variety of parks or civic spaces that they'd like to integrate in, even for infill development. Maybe the city owns some vacant lots around town where there's a gap in playgrounds that need to be integrated in close proximity to the neighborhoods. Well, then you have a variety of types that you could go and emulate into the existing fabric of the city. All right, that was a quick introduction into the place types and the overall components. Now I'm going to take you up to the character districts. This is the highest level of scale that's regulated into the code. Character districts, think of them in large cities as like you have a museum district, maybe you have a cultural arts district or a, excuse me, or you would have like a medical district, if you will. We did the same thing for Bastrop, but thinking about future generations. As this population increases, which we know that Central Texas is one of the hottest areas in the entire country, and our natural geography, our weather, our kind spirits will forever foster that type of movement of people here. People are vacating California as quick as possible to come experience what we've got in Central Texas. And what we're trying to do is to ensure that the long-term and the full build-out of Bastrop is representative of the existing character that it has and the history that was the foundation that made it what it was. So the character district's regulated at a very high level, and essentially what it does is it looks at the geography, and so it creates a variety of development patterns that would be allowed, a variety of place types that would or would not be allowed in particular areas, and so again, that's the highest level. Next would be the development patterns. We've introduced 3 different development patterns to emulate the characteristics of the natural environment based off of relief, the topography. You look at where Tahitian village is. You've got rolling hills, large pine trees. And so the main pattern, what we call the default pattern, is traditional neighborhood development. It's what you've got that was created through the Iredell map. It's that exact pattern. We coded that exact pattern back in. New neighborhoods that come in on greenfield sites or undeveloped land could choose that pattern in majority of the character districts, but not all of them. Next would be clustered land development. It's where you have a cluster of homes and you preserve open space around it. Maybe in areas where you have natural areas that are beautiful, or maybe there's features that need to be preserved. And so you can do a cluster of residential homes into little pockets. Next would be village development center. This is more intense. So this would be like where you'd have a commercial retail, get your Main Street, and it's primarily Main Street, and then you have majority preservation around that. So you would have preserved open space around little villages. So those are the 3 development patterns being reintroduced back into Bastrop. Excuse me. In order to create an appropriate line from the private property rights to the public realm, which is what the tax dollars go to, it's your streets, it's your public spaces, your sidewalks, we separated the code into 2 clearly defined spaces. Private realm, private property. Public realm, public property. Everything is governed by this. And what it does, it allows for your staff to administer this. It provides clarity for the property owners. It provides clarity for the city. And it's a very key element we think that was imperative to getting this done in the right manner to make all of the components come together and actually work. And so the private realm development standards are the individual pieces that fit on the lot. We talked a lot about those. It's your lot structure and how the buildings fit, where they go, the types of buildings that would be allowed, the types of uses within the buildings, and how they fit within the overall context of the private realm, And there are the examples of your building types. All of these buildings, again, would be on private property, and that's where they would be allowed to be built. Now I'm going to go into the public realm standards. Public realm development standards is for city infrastructure. But if new developers are coming town, they have to build this infrastructure. When development happens, they build the infrastructure to city standards and they give it to the city. They build it once and the taxpayers pay for it in perpetuity, right? So it's coming to the city. What we want to make sure is that the infrastructure that the city is receiving matches and emulates the patterns of development and the overall long-term goals for the community. So we created development public realm standards that would match those standards. Street trees every 30 feet on center, wide sidewalks in the appropriate areas, meandering sidewalks in the appropriate areas, open swell ditches on the streets in rural areas, lighter pavement sidewalks, or parking lots in rural areas. So we tried to make it to where the intensity of development didn't have to be the same, not one size fits all in each of the different patterns, so that whether it be a homeowner or someone building or someone that already has existing property can actually go and use these standards to create what they see fit in the appropriate areas. There are 2 types of streets that got classified. Local connector, these are residential streets. They're small, they're slow, they're not carrying a lot of traffic, they're local traffic, and because you have a grid, people are smart, humans are really wise creatures, and we're going to shift our patterns. If there's a traffic jam at one intersection, you're going to turn and make some right turns until you find a clearing. And because of that, the streets don't need to move at a rapid rate. They can move at a slow rate and carry the same capacity without having delays. And so we created a variety of local connectors. I believe there's 6 different local streets that got created, and then primary multimodal streets. One of the direction from the community and from the council was to create transportation options. And so we created the ability for multimodal streets. These are the sections that have 80 feet of right-of-way. Again, looking at your commercial sections. One of the other components that got integrated into this project was the update of the thoroughfare master plan to create the continuation of the farm lots. The platted farm lots, the white lines you see there, are all planned for local connector streets. And if and when the development does happen in those areas, they would be required to come in and actually demonstrate how they're meeting this. I'll get into the details of how that would occur in just a minute here. But these are 720 by 720 grids. And the blue lines are primary multimodal streets, so those are 80-foot right-of-way sections to carry traffic to and through to the individual neighborhoods. Those are connectors. The white streets are the local streets, meant to be local sections.
I just want to point out quickly that this PowerPoint covers 3F, 3G, and 3H since they're all intertwined, so I just wanted to point that out. So this would be moving into 3G on your agenda.
Okay. Y'all still with me? Going quickly. Is good? Okay. Now we're going to get into the application and how things get administered through the city staff. And so now we're back to this flow chart. If someone wants to build in Bastrop, build a house, or do a development, they would come to this flow chart. And it has a series, sorry, this thing's not quite working. I was going to hopefully zoom around on this. It has a series of if this, then this types of elements. And essentially what this will do is if someone has property and they are building a house, it would say, well, if you're building a house, go straight to the end. I wish I would do it. It says, yes, you have a platted lot, and it would take you right to the end. The process is matching, and it's very fluid, and it's very easy to use so that an applicant could know what they have in a very quick manner with one glimpse of a chart without having to read an entire code or take staff time to figure out what they need to do and what forms they need to fill out, what processes. It does it very quickly. It sends them right to the right place, sends them right to the right checklist, and so they can go into the code and find exactly the standards that they need. Once again, they would then, after they go through the flow chart, find out if they need to rezone or if they need a plat. Then they would go to the development standards to see how those patterns would fit together to pick a building type. One of the good things about this code is it's so flexible. Let's say that you like a building type and that's what you want to base your house off of. Well, then you could go and pick a building type and say, well, now I know that I need this place type in order to build this building. So you don't have to start with the place type. You can start with building type. Let's say that you're a developer and you want to start with street types. Or you can start with a street type and know what type of building type that would be allowed based off of market conditions at the time that development's taking place. The code is so fluid because everything is intertwined and linked back to each other that everything will fit together so that there's continuity between the individual characteristics, both on development intensity, on population density, and on the overall settlement patterns of how dense or not dense the development would be. Again, going through those individual standards. One of the things to make the process more fluid, whether you're building a deck or adding on to your house, we created what's called a development review committee, and it's comprised of all staff members that oversee development. Now someone can come in and sit down with each of the staff members, whether it be public safety to make sure that they're meeting minimum fire access requirements or sprinkler requirements, to the engineers to make sure that the engineering and the grades or drainage criteria are being met. All of the questions can be answered in one meeting rather than having individual staff send comments to each other and not talking, and then you get back a series of conflicting comments because the fire department didn't want narrow streets like the planning department wanted, and the planning department didn't want drive aisles cutting off. All of these individual elements of now would be reviewed at one time, and so each of the applicants would have one set of comments and that was discussed and debated amongst the team all before sending out conflicting comments, and it would help streamline the process, make it fluid, and then also relieve conflicts going out to the applicants and from the community. The DRC is approval of infill. If someone's coming in to build a residential house, or if they have the place type and the building types that are allowed by the code, they would be allowed to administratively approve development that meets the standards on platted lots that doesn't need rezoning, that has already been entitled under its allowable uses. They would have the approval authority. For neighborhood regulating plans, the DRC would review the regulating plan. They would bring it to the commission. I'll get into what the regulating plan is in just a second here. They would review it, and then it would become a public hearing such as this today. It would come before the Planning and Zoning Commission for public hearing, and it would go to the City Council for public hearing. Any character district boundary changes, place type changes would also come before the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council, just as it does today for normal zoning hearings. What qualifies as an infill site? Infill sites are anything less than 3.4 acres that has an established street network, that has existing utilities, that has an assigned place type, and they would be allowed to develop by right. It means that you've already planned for the development to be there. You've built the streets, the city has provided the infrastructure, provided the utilities, the water, wastewater, stormwater infrastructure would be to the site, and anything that would need a place type zoning change, again, would be coming back before the Planning Commission and the City Council for approval. For an infill submittal, they would have a pre-development meeting, which means the staff would go out and walk the site with them. Where are the features? What way is the drainage flowing? What streets are out there now? Is it adequate to serve the infrastructure? What size water, wastewater line is out front? What's the intensity being added? Those site visits will really help to make sure that the site is being taken care of, and these site visits will also create a collaborative relationship amongst the applicant and the staff. Right now, the applicant reads the codes, submits a plan, staff says, no, wrong, guess again. I'm not saying the staff does this, I'm just saying in general terms. No, wrong, guess again. They submit new plans, they modify, the staff goes back. That would be eliminated. And so you start a collaborative process right from the front end by actually going and understanding what's out in nature and what's on the existing site. At this time, the staff would require a legal description of the lot, a geographic map just showing what street intersections, where it's located on the ground, the internal street networks, the public frontage plan, which means showing how the streets are going to interact with the lot structure, and geographic sensitivity, just a sketch drawing showing how everything's going to lay out, where you're putting your parking, where's your drainage, where are your lights, where are your dumpsters, where all of those individual elements that come with humans need to be shown on that. And they would have to show their building types and their building plans of how it's going to be laid out as well. If you have a infill lot and you're P3 and you want to build a house, you come in and you pull building permits. You'd have to have a drainage plan, show where the public frontage is and how that's done, and building permits would be issued. Next, we have a zoning concept scheme. This is for anything larger than 3.4 acres that needs place type changes, that has, they would need to review their character districts, they would determine which appropriate development patterns would be allowed, and they would demonstrate their block and street networks. Now, this is a neighborhood being created. This is a Hunters Crossings coming in, they want to create a brand new neighborhood. This is the process they would go through. And this is an illustrative plan that would basically lay out the neighborhood, and that would be submitted to the Planning and Zoning Commission, the DRC, and through the City Council. All of this, again, would require public hearings, and so it's a public process and would need a public consultation. And this is an example of what's called a pedestrian shed. A pedestrian shed is about a 5-minute walk time. What we did is we did an analysis of your existing development patterns and created a series of pedestrian sheds based off of your existing patterns that are on the ground today. As this goes forward and place type changes come before the commission, you could look at this map and say, well, there's a gap of P3. Let's say that it's an intense zone that only has retail and there's no housing, and you want to add housing, then that's where you would do this. I'm going quick. Matt's giving me eyes like, roll on. I'm going. Within those areas, this is a lot of information to convey in a quick time. We created, for new neighborhoods, they would have a variety of place type allocations. So they could do a mix, and this would allow for a variety of market trends. We don't know what's happening in the future, but what we do know is that the patterns have worked downtown for 187 years and counting, and it will work again. And so we created these metrics off of the existing fabric that you have today. That's how these standards became Oh, it didn't get updated. I'm sorry. This was going to be an example of where I'd show you a raw piece of land. So this was a 25-acre parcel of land that really exists in Bastrop today. And what we did is we drew a series of neighborhoods on top of it. It's a layered approach. That's why you see all three on there. Sorry. And it's showing how the zoning concept scheme would come before the Planning Commission, the Council, and what the DRC would see. So this would be an infill pattern. The lots you see on the bottom down here are existing residential homes. They would need to be illustrated. They would need to show how they're going to handle traffic. So this would be a street coming back on the rear. And here's the civic space where you would have a plaza or some type of community garden. And this would be your drainage. It would function like a park, but it could also handle your stormwater. And so we designed some neighborhoods to show how a variety of housing types. These could be townhomes and fronting a central green. These are normal detached residential structures. This is a sample of what a zoning concept scheme may look like. Under the middle of a zoning concept scheme, excuse me, first thing would be, again, a site visit and a meeting. Meet on site, look at the acreage, walk the acreage, discuss what the key features are. Where's the main civic space going to be? Where's the center of the development? Hopefully the applicant kind of understands their property and would be able to walk the staff through it, showing how that would work. Next, they would submit the zoning concept scheme to the city. They would define their private realm development standards of how the lots and each of the elements are getting conveyed on the land. Then they would have to show their public realm standards and their platting. Platting is just the creation. It's a term that the state created to create legal lots of land. Everyone is all of the lots on the ground are either lots of record or platted lots, and that means that you have a legal lot to build on. So they would go through their platting standards. Place type allocation would be determined for infill based off of the place type zoning map. That's the map that we've seen with the purple and the blues. That's already predetermined for anything on infill. Zoning concept schemes would determine those place type allocations at the time that they'd submit. They would do the determination by the character district, the development pattern, street network, existing proximity to place types. How is it getting integrated with the existing developments? The pedestrian shed analysis to show what their walk time is and how each of those elements would be fitting into those individual characteristics. Would you like to tag team this? Excuse me. The Iredell Historic District, again, it was created in 1920. This was a late addition into this process, and it came because of some state legislation. The city wanted to be able to regulate what they were able to regulate now, and they needed a historic district in order to meet the minimum state law requirements in order to accomplish it. The district was created because it was an existing district. The boundaries made sense for an area that was representative of historic Bastrop, and as Mr. Jones stated earlier, a certificate of appropriateness would not necessarily be deemed for each of the individual properties.
So this goes back to what I talked about earlier. This is the area of the Iredell map. It directly relates to the 1920 Iredell map. We actually went back and found the minutes of the city council meeting in 1920 where they hired this gentleman to go survey the land, and then we have the recorded minutes of that meeting and all that process. So it was really neat to go back and look at. But again, this was it was brought into the codes, pulled into the codes as a reaction to the House bill. And again, like it was stated, unless you are a historic landmark, a recorded Texas landmark, an archaeological landmark, or National Register on Historic Places, you do not have to go get a COA from the HLC. So again, it's only tied to materials as it relates to the pattern book, and it's just put in there so we can continue doing what we've had the ability to do in Bastrop for the last several years.
Can you give us one example, if we didn't do it, of what we could end up with?
Say that one more time.
Could you give an example, if we didn't do this, what you could end up with in
Oh, yeah,
area
sure.
as far as
So you can,
buildings with materials aren't controlled?
yeah, so the state, let me put this down. Sorry, that was awkward. So the state said that any building material that's allowed in the current building code or the last 3 renditions of is acceptable building material. So it doesn't matter if we're here in Bastrop and it's susceptible to flooding, fires, and other. If you're in El Paso or if you're, on the coastal region, they're saying any building material in any city is okay as long as it's allowed in the building code. So if you don't do this, you could wind up with a building built on, I'll say Main Street, 95 or other that is like sheet metal, for example. You can have roofing materials that are just not controlled. And so in the Iredell district, it speaks to brick, some wood, some of those masonry elements that would allow us to regulate those within the district. If without that, you could wind up with just about any building made out of any building material that's allowed in the building code.
And that was my point. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that if we didn't do this, you could end up with a Mueller building right in the core, downtown on an empty lot.
As long as it meets the life safety and the building code, you could. And so that was the reasoning behind it, to protect the integrity of that area. And it's done through the pattern book. So the pattern book would require the materials be adhered to, and the materials are embedded in the pattern book. Otherwise, the pattern book is it's a guide, but it's not mandatory. So it's not mandating architectural styles within the Iredell district. It's just building materials. And again, it's approved at a staff level. It's not an extra step that a property owner would have to go through.
I'm going to talk just a little bit about the pattern book. I'll be very brief, but it's important. We actually studied the individual characteristics of the houses in Bastrop and studied all of the physical makeup that made them great. The porch dimensions, how they fit on the lot, the roof styles, the dormers, and it was written into an inspirational book. It's there for inspirational inspiration, education, and portion of regulation just based off of building materials. But it's also a lovely read, and it explains how the history of the city came to be, and it shows you some important structures and how they actually fit into the fabric of the city. So with that, welcome to the B3 Code. We're really excited to introduce this to you all. It has been a ton of work through a lot of community effort, and we're very proud of all of the work that you all put into it, as well as all of the members of the community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt, and I can't thank you enough for all your hard work and the staff's work also. At this point, Matt Jones. I would like to go back to the three items that we talked about earlier. One of the things that I think a lot of folks are here about is the map that was overlaid P4 on Main Street. I want everybody here to know that it is the staff recommendation. The commission has not voted because we haven't talked about it, but it'll be the chair's recommendation also that we adopt the staff recommendation and that the P4 overlay past Orm Street be removed. Do we have any comment about that? Go ahead, Papa.
Well, I just wanted to see that a little bit closer. I know that what was the nature of the comments? I mean, I was trying to read through some of this, and it seemed like they were more concerned about it being more commercial.
Correct.
And
right now we already have a process that if someone wants to be upzoned, that they can come and request
Correct.
that. They didn't want to just allow it without having a process to come back and request it. So it's the staff recommendation that it not go all the way out to where it's shown in the map.
Okay.
And that
It would be
stay
a
as
like
it
for
is.
like transition.
Yeah.
Right.
Everybody okay with that? Okay. The second one, we only touched on briefly. It's the LCRA property. And let me go, and I'll open the public hearing and allow comments in just a moment. The LCRA property. There was concern about that the designation to P4 would allow different types of activities on that property that are not allowed now. Am I correct that neighborhood tourism and P4 are basically the same thing? That if we go down to P3, it's a taking and it is illegal? Is that correct?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. And then the Iredell map. I think you've pretty well explained that. Okay. So at this point, what I'd like to do is open the public hearing.
I have
Okay.
some comments.
Okay.
And if you want to address those, we had some property owner responses that we can cover ahead of the public, or we can do it after.
Well, go ahead and then
Okay.
make your comments.
Colin,
and then,
can you go back to the other PowerPoint, please?
I also had one thing that I thought, if Matt explained early on, would help with some of the explanations
Well,
whenever he's done.
Yeah, he did explain some, but if he's got a further comments, let's go for it.
Yep. So we created a one-page sheet that gave property owners. Yep. So it gave property. Well, first I'll just cover the entire response. So we sent out letters to roughly 4,700 letters went out in the city and explained what your place type is, or what your zoning is today, and then what your place type would be. From that, we had 34 letters received back in favor, 48 that just had no objection. We received 57 that were in opposition, and then 6 that didn't select any option. They just sent the letter back in for a total of 145. And then again on Main Street, just to clarify, we went and broke that one down. We received 4 letters in favor of going to P4, no objection were no letters, and then 16 letters in opposition. And then again, 1 that did not select anything, just received it for a total of 21. And then with the Iredell Historic District, I believe we sent out roughly 2,000 letters to the property owners within that district. We received 22 in favor, 13 had no objection, 32 opposed, and then no none selection, and then for a total of 67. So that's the breakdown of it. We provided those for you at the dais tonight. to hopefully take a look at a few of the comments and give some background on that. And then staff, we created a one-sheet fillable individual place type change request. So if you got your letter and you did not like what you were going to be zoned to, we created a one-sheet form that said, what is your place type currently proposed as? What would you like it to be? Why would you like it to be that? And then it would let staff, give staff the ability to look at it, make a recommendation, and forward it on to P&Z and council. So I'll briefly go through the ones that we've received to date, and then any additional that we receive. We do have these forms available for you tonight if you'd like to fill them out. Any additional forms that we get, we will forward along to council for consideration. So the first one is 1706 Farm Street. The proposed place type is a P5. And they're requesting a P4 mix. It was P5 because in the form-based code it is commercial mixed use, which is a very intense classification. It does so. The properties you see there, the properties you see on to the left of the subject property actually front on Highway 95, which given a P5 designation to those makes sense. There's a pretty clear delineation between those properties that front on 95 and this property. And also this property is surrounded by P4, so staff is recommending approval of that request. This one at 701 Austin Street is proposed the P3 neighborhood. Because it is neighborhood in the form-based code, they're requesting a P4 mix. It's consistent with the other place types in the area, so staff is recommending approval with this request. 606 Cedar Street, this is actually behind Main Street, and this is the parcel behind Tracy's Grocers. And it is the same property owner, so it does not front on Main Street, but this area has already been identified. There's Tracy's Grocers right there, so some already mixed in the area. It's right at an intersection, and since it's the same property owner, staff felt it's appropriate to give the same place type to this property, so staff is recommending approval that this one go to P4. 1210 Main Street is proposed to go to P4 mix. I think we know the story on this one. They're requesting P3, and staff is in favor of going back to P3. Again, 1610 Main Street, proposed P4. They want P3, and staff is recommending approval of that. 1407 Main Street, proposed P4. They're requesting P3, and staff is in favor of going to P3. And again, 1700 and 1704 Main Street, it's proposed as P4. They're requesting P3, and along with our staff recommendation tonight, it will be going back to P3. This one is 250 Laura Lane. It's proposed P2 rule, and they're requesting P3. The current zoning on it is SF20, so it's a rather large lot. Most of these lots in this neighborhood are large lot, even have some 5-acre lots in the area. So the comment form actually speaks to the entire neighborhood being zoned to P3. Given the size of the existing lots and what's surrounding it, I don't know that P3 is the appropriate way to go for the entire neighborhood. Just to zone the one to P3 in a whole area of what would be P2 does not make much sense from a consistency standpoint in the area. So for that reason, staff would recommend keeping this one as P2. And those are the only property owner responses that we've received to date. Again, we have them available for anybody here tonight that would like to request otherwise. And that, Chair, is all of the comments that we have.
Do we have any comments or questions from the commission? Matt?
Just with everything we're changing right now with the code, i.e. everything, why mess with zoning rather than just do everything as straight like-for-like zoning? And since the code has built into it the process for changing your zoning if you want to, let each of these individual requests be taken care of at a different date. So that the idea of a comprehensive code doesn't get confused with what my personal place type is or what my personal zoning is. Why bother taking care of of all the zoning right now? All these individual parcels coming out, it's a giant code. I feel like we're just dealing in minutia that can be sorted out elsewhere, rather than focusing on getting a code that works for the city and that we can all live with.
I think the code's not changing. The code is applied consistently, but I think given the scale of what we're doing, I feel, and staff feels, and the organization feels it's appropriate to give citizens a voice. They own the property. If they don't agree with what's going on, I think that they should be given an opportunity to at least request that.
And I completely agree once we open the idea of zoning it, but say just Main Street in general. It's always been SF7. It would have made sense just to leave it at P3, but at some point we made the decision to go P4, which is upzoning the area rather than giving the whole community a chance to just focus on that problem. So I completely agree that going back to P3 and letting it go through, awesome. But let's go up the street a little bit further where Tracy's happens to be. I know the form-based code did a lot of discussion around this area and whether to include the second lot on Cedar as far as part of the, I'm not sure what its current zoning is, but as far as, you know, what we're calling now changing the request for P4, which I think is a totally fine request and something that could easily be addressed, but why are we addressing it now when we're trying to pass the code rather than letting that be a specific topic that we can then alert the 200 feet around all the neighbors and let them come in and have a conversation that really means something about just that piece rather than just either including this giant piece where people are either likely to say, you know, we're changing everything, who cares, let's just do it, or saying, well, I don't like what's happening to me, so let's just throw the baby out with the bathwater. I guess that's my concern with opening up the question, and rather than just like for like zoning, let's just zone everything like for like, and then let all these other conversations happen at a later date, which the code is written to take care of.
You could certainly do that. I think it's, you know, you're trading one situation for another. Either you deal with it today when we're doing it as a whole, and deal with them on a case-by-case basis where they make sense. I think out of over 4,000, 4,500 letters, we've only received 7 requests. I don't think that that's something that you know is an undue hardship. I do feel like taking them individually in the future would have some different consequences around it. So I feel like at least it was a thought. If we're going to do it now, let's do it right and make sure everybody's in agreement with it. They have the right to request it. Doesn't mean staff will recommend approval. It doesn't mean you all will recommend approval. But as a property owner, I think it's an appropriate thing to do to at least give them that opportunity.
So I'm gonna reiterate what you said in a different way. My fear is that we will run into situations later with notice requirements from the state. And what I mean by that is this. I'm just use the property on the screen, for example. If currently that individual, okay, or after the code is passed, wants to change their zoning, we get a public hearing on that one item. We have the 200-foot notice requirements, and there's a process for that. Looping changes or spot zoning into the implementation of the code, I think we're running into the issue because what happens is we send everybody out and say, okay, we're having this public meeting on the whole code, and inside that much larger meeting and discussion, we're talking about this one individual thing, where maybe somebody who's 1 or 2 properties over said, you know what, I'm not worried about my property, it's going to be the same, but they might show up if they had known that we're discussing this one specific property and whether or not they want to live next to a P4 or P3. So I'm in agreement with Matt that a like-for-like zoning initially citywide should just be the way it is. And then if after that we want to have change in place types, that they should go through the regular process, neighbors get notified. You know, right now, if through this process, if most of the Main Street citizens want to just do P3, but somebody can come in and make a good argument for why they want it for P4, we're still going to end up with P4 spotty all the way up and down Main Street for the 6, 7, 8 folks that want to do it. And at that point, we won't have any additional notice because it's all done internal. So my fear is, you need one person with enough money to sue the city and, because they weren't provided a notice requirement, and you kind of get into this issue.
So to be clear, it's not spot zoning.
Well, it is because we're implementing the code, and instead of doing like for like, we're doing...
You're not spot zoning, though. You're looking at it in context of the neighborhood, and we have met all the state requirements as far as notification in the newspaper, and we did send out 4,700 letters.
But none of those letters talked about this property the zoning being changed for this property or the other one. And not only that, I think the public perception is going to be an issue if through the implementation of the code.
For legal
I got a
requirements.
follow-up to your comment.
I hate to interrupt, but
Yeah.
I may be the only person on this dais, but I asked you guys to do something. I asked you guys to read this and be ready with questions and comments and to make recommendations. I had hoped to be able to go forward with a firm recommendation on this. I am not opposed to this at all. I don't feel that I have had enough time. Y'all have been working on it a year and a half, at least a year. We got this document after 5 o'clock on. We got this document after 5 o'clock on Friday. And I spent a lot of my weekend and nights reading, and it's how it all fits together that I have some questions about. Not that I'm opposed to it, but like we've said from the get-go, we need to do this right because it's going to affect our community for many generations to come. And I think we're on the right track. I would like to open up the public hearing in a little bit and give the folks that are here and have asked to speak. And we may want to make some recommendations on that. But I would like to have some more time to consider this with workshops and having one of the mats, both of the mats, help us to understand how it all fits together. And I'd like to have comments from other members.
I really need to say something. You guys have done a great job. I think I want to tell the people here that what we've done is we have really raised the bar in a really good way. And we've gone out and got a really great team. And we're at the point now where I think we're ready to go. And we can, and I know we've been working on it for a while, and we're getting some parts of it, but we've actually been talking about all of this all along. So I would say, to be fair to them, yes, we did get a printed document, but we've gone through this a little bit. And so I know I've seen these things before. I think we have, it's almost like, Dan Smith, who you brought, right? We've got some really good ideas here. The biggest thing about this is instead of letting development tell you how things are going to happen in spot areas, and that's what creates sprawl, we're taking the bull by the horns and we're going to say, no, this is how we really want to do it. And that's what they've done. They've looked at the DNA and they've really said, these are the areas and this is the way to do it. And this is the way you're going to control growth. And that's kind of what we've been tasked with. So we're taking that initiative. We've hired some really good people. We paid them a lot of money, I'm sure. Maybe not enough. But we are at the point now where we really need to do something. And I think they've done a great job. I feel like we could find ourselves in a position where we're going to be going in circles. But my opinion is what they've done out here is outstanding. It's going to be, in my opinion, professional opinion, it's going to be one of the best codes in the state because we're going to do something that even City of Boston can't do. And I think we have a really good code coming.
I don't think that we have been working on this a really long time, and I'm very happy to see so many citizens from the community here because that tells me that we do need to take more time. Obviously, the individuals from our community that are present tonight have read the letters that they received, and they have some concerns, obviously. So I would like to make sure I understand what the community concerns are, make sure that there were a couple of things that were introduced tonight that were not discussed. The Iredell district, I don't recall us discussing that, right? So, and we were given this like on a Thursday night, I think it was Friday night, on a Friday night in the, weekend, 2-3 days, and then you go back to work in your regular work day. So I ended up referring to a lot back to just older notes that I wrote to try to refresh my memory on all the information we did receive. But I think we would be remiss if we do not take our community comments into consideration. I do like Matt's proposal as well. If individuals are wanting to do specific changes for their specific property, I think that could be addressed. If we're going to do the like for like, and then have them, sounds like that's the direction we're heading anyway, proceed in that manner.
Well, these are things I think we thank you for that. We'll get to everybody, but we need to have open our public hearing. We have some people that have requested that they speak, and then we'll get back to taking more time or not taking more time or making recommendations after the public hearing. Anybody want to take a break? Or y'all keep going? Okay. I hear you. Mr. Ron Barclay, I'm not sure what part of 3F you want to talk about, but come on down.
Thank you for letting me speak tonight.
You'll have 3 minutes, sir.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
And please state your name and address.
Okay, it's Ron, excuse me, Ron Barclay, and I'm at 1704 Main Street. My wife and I purchased the Orgain House, the historic Orgain House, in June of 2018. And there were probably 3 primary reasons that we did that. And one of the main ones was that there was a true hometown feel to Bastrop when we were looking around of where we were going to move. We came from Austin. And the fact that Bastrop has a neighborhood feel, it has a hometown feel. There's historic homes, large and small. There's homes that are not historic, but they all fit in, and it all feels like a community. It feels like a hometown, a neighborhood. And with the individuals that we already knew prior to coming here, every one of them that we asked, they loved living in Bastrop. It was their hometown, their neighborhood. Everyone, to a T, loved it. Those 2 things really swayed us when we made the decision to buy the historic Orgain House, or as many people know, Lerman's house, Dr. Lerman. During that time, we spent a considerable amount of money purchasing it and a considerable amount of money putting it in better shape and bringing it up to code. And I had no idea that any of this was being talked about. If I had known this, we might not have made that decision. If it was going to change from a P3 neighborhood to a P4 mix, which is not the intent, I feel, that the city founding fathers would have intended, or that anybody that currently lives here would want it to be. So to me, I think it's going against the grain of what Bastrop really is. It's a hometown, a neighborhood, a really great feeling. And I guess that's my big comments there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Where did they go? I have too many pieces of paper. There they are. Carol Wright.
Thank you very much.
Your name and address, please, ma'am.
My name is Carol Rice. My address is 1406 Wilson Street. I am here to address the LCRA issue. It is an issue that was not really talked about much, and certainly none of the neighbors were notified of any intention that the LCRA property was going to be zoned P4. We have been discussing this for the last 48 hours because that's all we've known about it. I have a letter from a citizen who could not be here tonight, and I was requested to read that to you all, if that is appropriate. May I do so?
Sure, I can go have 3 minutes.
It is addressed to you, Madam Chair, and to the commissioners. When I was presented the option to purchase the Riverside Conference Center to the LCRA Board of Directors, we all recognized it was a special opportunity that carried with it a commitment to preserve the integrity of the property and the historical neighborhoods of Bastrop. I believe that LCRA has met that commitment over the years. No other parcel of land in historic Bastrop offers more potential for good or for bad than the LCRA property. And I cannot imagine a scenario in which an open-ended P4 zoning reclassification would be wise. Any zoning change for that property should be part of a special planning process, which includes public input of the neighbors and an impact assessment of the proposed use. There is no buyer. This is not in the letter. It's my comment, side comment. There is no buyer. There is no plan. We have no idea what is happening to that property. Any purchaser who does not want to go through that process is not a developer who has Bastrop's best interest at heart. I hope any zoning reclassification is part of a thoughtful, transparent process where impacts are known and can be vetted by the community. This is not an issue defined by the surrounding neighbors. This development and the development of this property will have a lasting impact on Bastrop as we know it now and as we will know it in the future. Thank you for your consideration. Mark Rose, former General Manager of the LCRA. I don't know how much time I have left. About 24 seconds. Well, I wish I had more because if you look at the pictures that are online that were a part of but not included in what was shown up here, if you look at P3, which is the neighborhoods that exist on all three sides of the existing LCRA properties, and for blocks, not just backing up to it, but for blocks, you would see the P3 as beautiful, separated homes, and if you look at the P4 picture, it is a densely populated, massive amount of property and homes that is not conducive to anything that we feel was what the purpose of really preservation of this historic and the neighborhood tourism is. So I'm sorry we don't have more time, but I really, really hope you would reconsider this and keep it at the zoning that it is now and work on changing that.
Thank you. Frank Huffman?
So, my name is Frank Huffman. I've lived for the last 20 years at 1307 Main Street. So I don't have much to say as long as you accept the city staff recommendations to continue the properties along Main Street from Farm North in P3. I think it might be helpful for you to see those people here who have come tonight because of the LCRA issue rather than the one on Main Street. Thank you.
We're considering them all. Ms. Reese? Okay. Rob Rogers? I have two from you. You want 6 minutes? No, you only get 3.
Well, I want to make sure you got it. Okay,
you only get 3. That doesn't work.
Okay. And I'm going to try to do this quick. I don't know whether you got my comments and stuff, but I actually sent an email. Bob Rogers, 1408 Wilson Street. I'm sorry. All right. So I sent one to the city, but I'm going to try to say this real quick. I strongly oppose to the change. I have lived.
Which change are we talking about?
LCRA.
Okay.
I have lived next to this property since 1997. It has been very compatible with the surrounding neighborhood, and by changing it to P4, you would disrupt the tranquility of our neighborhood, increase traffic, most likely noise, and devaluate the surrounding properties. It needs to be left zoned as it is, and no need to change the zoning. And y'all can do that. Staff says no. It's your zoning regulation. You can add that in, leave it in, and the same rules apply. And as far as changing it to residential, the property owner can do that. LCRA can request it become residential. So LCRA has been a good neighbor. And if they understand the pressure they're getting from all the surrounding neighbors, that's a residential neighborhood. They've never in the past done anything against the neighbors. Anyway, so that's, okay, I'm just going to tell a little story because this property's always been very, very unique. Back in 97, the P&Z was looking at changing it, and it was, they had hired a consulting firm back then, And so they recommended something, but P&Z back then said, no, there's really no need to change it. Like I said, this is the only kind of property like that in the city. And so there was no other zoning that would do it. Just like now, this is a bad call. So that was their values, just like this company here. They're trying to impose their values. Some of the stuff they got, in my opinion, is good, and a lot of it does not fit Bastrop. Take this to Hutto, take it to Buda. This is not our town, what they're proposing. I wouldn't want to live in this town. If this is the way it's going to go, adios. I'm just saying, anyway, that's the brunt of the LCRA deal. And the other was the historical district deal. Our systems work fine. We don't need to have the government tell us what to do. Our commission has been fine the way it is. The building codes protect all the rest of that. That's all I kept hearing. We've already got them adopted. All they need to do is enforce them. We'll be safe. And I don't think the DRC design committee should be just staff. I think they ought to have some citizens on that inputting on what the design should be.
Thank you.
Oh, and I'm going to agree with Carol Rice. We never got notice of the zoning change and stuff like that. And
it's because it was like zoning to like zoning. That it was not a change in the way it functioned.
Okay, I got the one on my property. It's supposed to be like zoning. So why didn't I get the other?
We'll have more time to talk later.
Yeah, we might.
Ms. Hoover?
Good evening. My name is Judy Hoover. I live at 1316 Wilson Street. First thing I want to address is the neighborhood tourism zoning. This is what it allows. It also has conditional use and not allowed. So there's permitted, you can do it if you get a conditional use permit, and then absolutely not allowed. So the statement that this would be down zoning, it's not correct, because things that are in P4 would require a conditional use in this neighborhood tourism chart. So I would encourage you to look at this. I want to read into the record a note that I sent to you all earlier. Per our conversation on providing feedback to the planning department regarding the proposed zoning change to P4 for the property known as BCAT account 31253. Although we do not own this property, we do live adjacent this tract and believe the proposed change could adversely affect our property value as well as our ability to enjoy life in our neighborhood. The compound was given a special zoning, neighborhood tourism. There's nothing else zoned that in the city of Bastrop. In the 1990s to Joyce Gay for the purpose of developing a small community of artists. All the old buildings were brought in and restored. Later in the 90s, LCRA bought the compound and built a meeting room, kitchen, and motel units. It's been mostly unused for many years and is now on the market for over $2 million. Any potential for-profit investor would have to build structures in a very dense design in order to profit. That is not in harmony with everything around that tract of land. This is a neighborhood. A more sensible approach would be to zone it P3, and if a buyer or new owner wants to develop it into something other than single-family residences, which is the neighborhood it's located in, they could approach the city with a plan and request a variance. This situation is much like the previously proposed P4 along Main Street, which has now been proposed as P3. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other citizen comment sheets here. Did I miss anyone? If not, I'll declare the public hearing closed. And we were talking about, do we want to go forward? Do we want to make recommendations? Do we want to request from City Council that we have some workshop time? What, Patrick, Matt, I haven't heard from you. If you want to. If you want to.
I feel that we've had a lot of time to look at this. I mean, not in as complete form as it is. I think to a certain extent, City Council has fronted most of this and they've done most of the discussion work. City Council has fronted the majority of going through this and done the discussion work. We've kind of been thrown, I think, 12 topics that we went over and discussed and did what we were asked to do. As far as going forward, I would feel comfortable going forward with what recommendations we have, knowing that City Council is the one that's put this together. This isn't the final night of say-so, but then they make the decision on how they want to treat a number of these individual ideas. That still has to be read before City Council twice before it's passed, and I think we even have a workshop scheduled with City Council before then so that we can discuss several of these items. I like the code. I like the way it's going. I don't necessarily agree with the changing any zoning as it is. I understand the unique nature of the LCRA land. They could sure make it easy if they did want to make it P3 to just come forward and ask that to be part of this. I think we could all see maybe make an exception on zoning if they wanted to change it to P3. But I would feel comfortable making our recommendations and passing on to City Council. And if City Council feels that they haven't had enough time to go over this, that they are kind of being given something that they don't understand, I would be happy for them to say, let's back off and hand us some more topics that we can discuss and help them out going forward.
Thank you.
So, much like we do when we do our plat approvals, I like to clarify for those who aren't used to the process. So, some of the things that we're talking about are things that we may or may not have a choice in. And so for the LCRA property, for example, legal looked over it. We may have no choice but to do a P4 if we leave it in its current configuration because downgrading it would be illegal. And as much as we don't want to have P4 type things there, we also don't want to end up in a potential lawsuit where the city spends a ton of money trying to defend that decision. So it may be one of those things where we don't have a choice. Much like when we approve plats, as long as the plat meets the requirements, we don't have the authority as the city to say no if they've done what they're supposed to do. So it may be one of those things where we don't have a choice. And while not a popular opinion, going back and rewriting the whole code to address one single property within the city is probably not a good use of city funds or staff time. And I know it may be an unpopular opinion for those that are in the area, but we would have to go through and rewrite maybe not all the place types, but several of them, and or add something in, which may become counterproductive at this point. So that's what I'll say about that. The historic overlay is, again, something we may have to do to continue to have some control over the things that are in that area because of recent changes in the legislature. It's not necessarily that we want to, we may have to. Otherwise, if you start to infill some of these areas that are around here, again, you could end up with somebody that uses OSB as their siding, and that's what they want to do. And they're allowed to do it because it's a approved building material. And so we're trying to avoid things like that. That may be what the overlay is there for, is to prevent that. The other thing, Matt Jones, I'd like you to see if you could give a little bit more detail to, and I was going to try and hit Matt while I was doing his presentation, but can you explain a little bit, because I've had this question come up talking to folks out in the community. We talk about fiscal sustainability as being one of the driving factors of this code, and the questions that I've had from folks are, well, what's wrong with Hunter's Crossing or Riverside Grove? Why aren't those fiscally sustainable? And can you expand a little bit more on why fiscal sustainability with development is so important, especially given the new cap and increase in funds that were recently put into place, and how replicating downtown is a better option than replicating what we've done for decades now?
Yeah, so Virginity did a fiscal impact analysis on the city of Bastrop, and when he presented that information of the findings to town council, the only fiscally sustainable area of town was downtown. It looks like Emerald City in the Wizard of Oz, amongst a lot of other things. When you show that, represent that graphically, the property taxes and the revenues that it generates is one of the only areas in town that pays for itself. Current suburban sprawl patterns They're expensive to build. They're more expensive to maintain. And like Mr. Lewis said, the developer puts it in one time, and then we have to pay for it in perpetuity. What that means is bad planning or bad infrastructure planning or thoroughfare planning can have unintended consequences of having higher costs to maintain over the life of the asset. So if it's done poorly, you have to repair it more often, and then it becomes you have to replace it more often. So when looking at it from a fiscal impact analysis, right now the way things are going, I believe it's over the next 30 years, and it's like 104 or 120 million dollars in the red. That is our deficit that we are operating under right now if we continue to enforce the rules and regulations that we have in place today. And so that's a big part of it. You're right. The cap does impact that. I'll tell you what also impacts that is our ability to annex. The state has now said that you cannot no longer involuntarily annex or put annexation plans in your statutory ETJ. So when we thought we were working with 145 square miles, we're now down to the 9 square miles of the city limit, 9.47, I think. So given all those facts, it's imperative that we do differently, because what we're doing today is not working, and I think that's what ties it back to the fiscal impact. So as a part of this, when they come in, we'll look at everything from geographic sensitivity to infrastructure planning, and that's one of the reasons we came back with a thoroughfare plan, because a gridded network street, it's less cost on infrastructure, less cost to maintain, and it's also gives more opportunities to use that. So it's not just a transportation and connectivity, it's emergency services, right? We have the river that dissects the town, the state highways, so it all goes back into this code and building that.
So in more layman's terms, just to summarize, if we keep building the way we've been building, in the next 20 or 30 years, our city will be bankrupt and or taking out bonds and other ways of paying just for the infrastructure.
So we get revenue through taxes, sales tax generation. So if we're not taking any more in, then yes, that's a correct statement.
There is no way I feel confident making recommendations on the one factor I've heard tonight was the LCRA property. I don't have clarity that it is illegal to make it a P3. I think there are ways to work around that. Clearly the neighbors don't want it. They live here in the city. We need to give the people of the city what they want. We don't need to change things. I would like for us to talk more. I don't feel comfortable making a recommendation just on that one fact. Main Street, I'm good with that now since you made that recommendation, but I don't feel good at all making a recommendation to the council, especially with the LCRA. So if we need to have a workshop, if we need to hold off recommendation, but there's too much, it's too vague on that. That's my opinion.
Yeah, it's been a lot to read through, but we've been working on it a long time, and I just need to move forward with it. I think I like the recommendations of the Main Street, like you, the LCRA. I'm not really sure on. I don't have enough info on that, so I'm new to town. I've only been here for like 2.5 years, so.
I guess we move forward and ask for a recommendation.
Yes,
I have closed the public hearing. I have heard from the council, from the commission. I will now accept a recommendation, or a motion on what recommendation we wish to pass along to the city.
I make a motion to recommend approval of the code in its current form, with the exception of the Main Street properties and the recommendation made by staff, and that we continue doing like for like zoning for the whole city, citywide, and address spot changes in current zoning at a later date after the code is implemented. Did we get everything? That'll be my motion.
I'll second the motion.
Can I get a clarification? You
Sure.
said like for like zoning.
Correct, so we're not taking what would be a P3 currently and making a P4 for the implementation of the code. We're just saying if it's residential, it's residential. If it's commercial, it's commercial.
So we would be basically changing, how does that affect what we're proposing right now with the zoning map?
So everything received a like for like, with the exception of Main Street. But to be clear, like Tracy's on Main Street, it's commercial today, so it would still receive the P4 even though it's on Main
And
Street.
Highway 95? 95, same way too, it's like for like?
Yes.
Okay.
What about those individual requests?
We're going to move forward. We've established a process for that. We've made it available to the citizens. I understand your motion includes not to do that, and that's a recommendation. It's within your scope. It's something y'all can discuss at your workshop on the 30th as well, but it's certainly within. We're going to move forward with that, and then of course it'd be up to City Council whether or not they want to go with that recommendation or not.
My motion is to not allow those currently and address them after the implementation of the new code.
So my question is, back to the LCRA, how the neighborhood tourism doesn't seem like it's a P4 to me at all. So if we're doing like for like, and if that motion carries, that means we're putting them in a P4, and I don't know how that could be a P4.
But it's not P3 either. It's a mix between the two. So we would need to create the staff would have to go back and rewrite the code to the extent of adding that piece in there, which may be the decision the council makes. But you know, we aren't making anything. We aren't putting anything on the table or taking anything off the table that council doesn't already have. Whether we approve or deny, as long as it goes on to council, they can do what they want, and you know, they can make the decision to go back in the code, which they initiated and they started, and say, hey, look, add a category to this. Just for that, I mean, they have that power within them.
We also have a workshop on Monday where we further discuss it, even though we've made a recommendation.
But passing it to council allows it to put it in the hands of the people that can make that decision.
Is there a way, Matt, to put that in now, to change, to not have that P4 now?
Well, what would you say? What would you recommend it change to?
Well, as Matt was saying, it's a very special case, and it's neighborhood tourism, and we're going to have to go P1, 2, 3, 4, but it's a special case, and I don't think I think P4 is way extreme for that area.
So I don't think it's a P5. I certainly don't think it's a P3.
Is commercial allowed in neighborhood tourism?
Some forms, yes.
Matt, are there any other areas of Bastrop that are similar to LCRA property?
No. No. But the problem is neighborhood tourism does not exist. Similar to every other zoning classification we have today, with the adoption of this codes, they just don't exist. There's no language for them. So it needs to be something. And P4 is the most appropriate place type we have in the books today for that property.
I understand that. I just know the building patterns for P4s or apartments, townhouses, and I have a big issue with all that being.
And actually, there's townhomes and those rear yard buildings are not allowed, and that may be what's the issue is. It would only allow for house form structures. There was a mistake on those on P4 allowing the apartment and row house. That is not permitted. It is marked in the code as not permitted. And so I just want to clarify that the code has been updated. Those are not permitted. That was a mistake. Rear yard buildings are specifically not allowed in P4 districts.
So that's
that
been
would
changed since the pattern book came out, because my pattern book says they are. So that's been changed.
In your pattern book, Well, it's in the actual development standards chart. It has been updated, yes, ma'am. And that, I believe that may actually relieve some of the issues. It is house form structures, the side yard, the courtyard, and the edge yard, which is a house, a villa, a ranch house, and those forms would be allowed. So that may actually relieve the issues. I don't know, but...
Can we get some more clarification from legal on why, if you could provide some more explanation on why we couldn't do P3 and by default we're stuck with P4 and how that works? That would be awesome.
Certainly. Madam Chair, if I may. So the P3 district would essentially, if you zone it to P3, you would be taking away uses that are currently allowed in the neighborhood tourism district. You'd be restricting the uses. Currently under the P3, what would be allowed, you'd have to get a CUP, a conditional use permit to continue the use or to use the property for what it's being used today. And so that restriction in use is not permissible. You're dead on that there is not a perfect fit like for like, but P4 is the closest thing for this neighborhood tourism district based on the uses that are being used today, and that could be used, I think, with Mr. Lewis's clarification regarding the restriction on using certain types of, say it again, building types within that, within the P4 district. It may alleviate some of the concerns that you have and our citizens have. It's really trying to find the best fit without restricting the uses, which is not permissible.
What would the consequences be if the city were to go and say, you know what, we're going to make it a P3, deal with it? What could the consequences for the city be?
Sure. So restricting the uses or lessening the intensity of the use could result in a reduction in the marketability and the value of the property. It could lead to a lawsuit against the city for reducing the value and the use of the property. And that's something I think the city wants to avoid. You know, one thing that you might be able to consider is some type of planned district. It's not really kind of how we formulated this code in this way, but given the unique nature of this specific piece of property and the historical use and the fact that the owner is a governmental entity, may give rise to the consideration of that approach.
Could a future owner sue the city for something that occurred prior to their ownership? Like if they went back and accused the city of, so it would have to be LCRA would have to do it while they owned it.
The current owner, because you're restricting and you're lessening, essentially could be lessening the value, lessening the use of their property.
Matt Jones, I'm going to put you on the spot again. What is allowed in neighborhood tourism versus what is allowed in P4?
Okay, so neighborhood tourism, great question. So in P4, you can have commercial, but it only
define commercial. I mean, there's commercial and then there's commercial.
You could have a deli, you could have an accountant, you could have a retail store, you could have those types of things. You could not have any industrial type use, but you could have, you know, a shoe repair, any type of office really, and then like retail or a cafe. Yes, but it would have to look like a house.
Okay.
So as long as it looks like a house and it does not create a nuisance, it would be allowed under P4. In neighborhood tourism, retail sales with no drive-through are allowed with a conditional use permit. Retail establishments with incidental sales but no on-site food preparation or alcohol sales are allowed by right. Food services such as restaurants, cafeterias, bakeries, etc. With no drive-through are allowed by a conditional use permit. Art, antique, museum, furniture, or galleries, retail, repair, or fabrication are allowed by right. It does exclude automobile and electronic sales. Theaters, cinemas, or music venues are allowed with a conditional use permit. Fitness, recreational sports, gyms, athletic clubs, dance or yoga studios are permitted with a conditional use permit. Parks, greens, plazas, squares, and playgrounds are permitted. Schools, libraries, community, civic facilities, and religious institutions are allowed with a conditional use permit. Single-family residential, accessory buildings, and garage apartments, so an accessory dwelling unit's allowed. Multi-unit homes, so multi-family in a structure is allowed. And then single-family residential attached, so like townhomes, patio homes, and duplexes are allowed by right.
These are all things, just to remind everybody, these are things that can happen right now, today.
That's correct. Home occupations are allowed by right. Brewery, distilleries, and wineries are allowed with a conditional use permit. Utilities and utility services, electric, natural gas, and alternatives are allowed by right. Bed and breakfast, 5 or fewer rooms are allowed with a conditional use permit.
So it's almost, to me, P4 is slightly more restrictive than what we have now. There are several uses that you mentioned that could be done in a P4, like having a movie theater or having an outdoor music venue, stuff like that you mentioned that.
Well, yeah, but he's talking about conditional use permits, so that means they would be required to go before and get a permit for it. That is not automatically allowed on a lot of those.
It would come to us, they make the argument. We generally, unless there's some overriding.
But we would get neighborhood input and, you know, like we do now, so that would be an important step.
And if we still had conditional use permits inside this code, it would make sense, but we're doing away with conditional use permits, so.
That's right.
I think that's where the restriction is. No longer is it a yes, but with permission, it's just a no, which I think is where the downgrading would come into a P3. So it sounds like the P4 is very similar, if not slightly more restrictive than what we have currently.
Like
That's
our attorney
what it
said,
sounds
it's the closest classification in the code that there is today on the books.
P4 allows for homes to be built, right?
Homes to be built?
Homes?
Yes, it's primarily a
So-
residential district.
P4,
Yes.
So, like, just want to make sure that that's out there too.
And everything that's built there has to look like a
home.
residence anyway, even if it's a cafe
That's right.
or some type of retail, it has to look like a home.
So I have a question, because we're all, obviously, we still have a lot of questions. We all kind of are divided on what we would like to see happen, and our community has questions. So does the recommendation have to be that we approve the codes tonight, or can we recommend that council take a look at the issues that we keep discussing? The LCRA and the tourism.
I don't believe the council can, we have to provide a recommendation in order to move the process forward.
Right.
We have our workshop on Monday to hash out some of these issues, to bring them up, but us providing an approval, subject to these few items that we can discuss on Monday will allow them to move forward in the process to get this done on the same timeline that they want. I don't feel like there's been substantial changes to this, from the beginning, absolutely. From our last few meetings, it doesn't feel like we've had a substantial change to this. We've been able to hear some of the concerns. We've been able to address some of those concerns, or at least explain why we may or may not be able to address them and what makes them good. So I will renew or just remind that my motion is still on the table.
Can you restate your motion?
Restate it.
Yes. So the motion.
You only have 3 minutes.
15 minutes. So the motion is to recommend approval of the code as is, subject to the following changes. The Main Street zoning change classifications as recommended by the staff, and that zoning be consistent throughout the city, like for like, with no upgrades of any kind to any properties at this point in the process, and that those be done after the implementation of the code, so that each property has notification of citizens individually where they can show up and hear that particular item as a line item of discussion.
Second.
It's already been a second.
It's already been seconded.
Yeah.
It's still on the table.
It was a really good restatement, so I think, but I appreciate the enthusiasm.
Could I make an alteration to that motion?
Alternate.
I like the motion.
Friendly amendment, maybe?
An amendment. Because we have the exception of Main Street with staff recommendation, I would like also consideration of the LCRA for further discussion until that is solved. So that's my only amendment. I think everything else is fine.
So I would choose not to amend my motion only for this reason. That's only affects one single property, and we can still discuss it during our workshop on Monday, and the city council can still make changes after our recommendation for the final product.
Matt Jones and Matt Lewis, tag team. Would his motion impact or in any way cause havoc with the proposal?
His motion?
His motion, yes.
No, it would be a process. So the main
Like for like and the like.
we've
that's
done
okay.
like for like. It will not impact it. You're perfectly within your rights to do that. It's actually a staff recommendation. Like for like would be more of a policy decision, and so council would have the ability to either take that recommendation or accept the individual property owner requests.
Did not accept your amendment.
Madam Chair, one more question. So this is going to council regardless of whether we vote yes or no. It's either going with our blessing or going with our disapproval, but it's going to council. They
Yes.
will make the decision on whether this happens.
Correct.
We can't stop the process. We can't say no more. Only council can back off and say let's do more.
Right. You would be making a recommendation to council.
To go back to Cynthia, can a recommendation be that the LCRA property remain a P3?
So procedurally, where we're at, we have a motion
We have
on
a
the
motion
table.
and
It's been
a second on the
seconded.
Right, but
You
I
have
think
to-
that she was trying to relay what
He-
her issues were
but he
to
didn't
amend
accept-
the motion.
He didn't accept your
So he
amendment.
did not
I
accept
totally
it.
understand the amendment, but because it only affects one single property and is probably a broader issue that is more dealt with at a better level, being the city council, that's why my choice not to amend the motion.
Right, but he's saying he doesn't like her request for an amendment, but
Right.
that's not his choice alone to make, right?
It
Yes, it
is
is.
because
It is 'cause
there's a
it's
motion on the table.
His
So
motion.
you would have to vote on the motion, and if the motion failed, somebody else could make a motion. But if it's his motion, so it is his choice whether or not he wants to amend it.
Bubba?
One more, just input. Is there an option for like a conditional overlay when you have a unique situation? You can have a standard, like a place type, but then have an overlay?
So a planned development district is still a zoning classification in this code, but that would take a property owner requesting it.
Are there any other comments? Cynthia? Any more comments? Any more comments?
Just for clarification, Patrick has a motion out, it's been seconded. If that fails, we can make another motion. I could make one which could include the LCRA property.
That's
So
correct.
I just wanted clarification on all that.
Call the roll.
Debbie Moore.
Madam Chair, one second. So that was a long speech, but are you saying your proposal is to go with the recommendations of staff for the changes on Main Street
Yes, that is a part of the.
and
the
accepting the code as it is right now?
motion. As it is with like for like zoning throughout, we make an approval, and then if there's things Monday that we want to discuss during the workshop with city council, we can bring those up and
Right.
discuss them at that point, and they'll be able to do what they want with it. It's gonna be their call.
Thanks.
Got your finger on the button. No.
clarify, your motion does include the change for LCRA to P4.
It's not, it's, the motion is
Oh,
properties
it's
like
not.
for like,
Yeah,
which
yeah, yeah.
according to
Gotcha.
council for the city is, yes, that it would be going to P4. Yes. My motion does not include any specific recommendations for that specific property. It is just a general, all properties with guidance of council for the city are like for like.
Well, if it's like for like, then they're neighborhood tourism, so that doesn't make any sense because they don't fall between P3 or P4.
So there is no neighborhood tourism.
There is no neighborhood
Like
tourism
for like,
anymore.
as best as possible with the recommendation of the city's council. So that's.
Well, I think that currently what they are right now is essentially what they've said it's going to be is a P4. So it can't really be a
Right.
P3.
So Cheryl's question is,
It-
he's basically saying then they're P4, so if we approve that, we're approving it as P4.
Because going to a P3 would be downgrading them and opening us up to
Let's
lawsuits.
vote, folks. Let's vote, folks. Is everybody semi-clear?
Yes is in favor of motion, no is against.
That's right. Call the roll.
Debbie Moore,
Yes.
Patrick Connell,
Yes.
Cynthia Meyer, Matt Lassen,
Yes.
Cheryl Lee, Tom Dawson,
Yes.
Greg Sherry,
Yes.
Pablo Cerna.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, we've had discussion. I only opened the public hearing on 3F. We've
That's
also
right.
had discussions of 3G and 3H. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
So we would still need to hold.
So we need
public
to
hearing.
open them.
Yeah, I haven't, yeah. Well, we've already talked about.
Yes. So 3G would be the next item on the agenda.
Yes. We'll take a 5-minute break.
But the
Commissioners?
other uses that would be allowed in the P4 district are the most tangentially similar. Yeah, yeah. It's,
At last
there's
then?
no perfect fit. There's no perfect, that's the hard part.
Forgot I have. We'll come back to order, please. I have runaway commissioners. No, yeah, I have one more person. I have one more person, but it's on the. Kathy, are y'all here on a certain issue that we haven't covered yet? That you just like hanging out with us? You're so sweet. Okay. So why don't we consider the CUP, since I know those folks back there are. Where'd it go? Yeah, 3E. You going to do 3E?
Good evening. Yes, I'll do 3.
All right, we are, Planning and Zoning Commission is now back in session. It's 8:30. Ms. Bills, we're taking item 3E, public hearing and consider action to make a recommendation on a conditional use permit for the expansion of a religious institution used for Friendship Bible Baptist Church on Friendship Bible subdivision, which is zoned SF7, Single Family 7, within the city limits of Bastrop, Texas, and forward to the October 8, 2019 City Council meeting. Ms. Bibb.
Yes, so the request before you tonight is for a conditional use permit, which is in our current code. We haven't adopted a new code yet, so this is coming forward to y'all. The request is to expand the existing building of a church by adding a foyer to the front and additional classrooms, office space, and a kitchen on the northeast corner. So it's an expansion of the main building of an existing church, and then adding a paved parking lot. They currently kind of just park, and they have a small parking lot that's there. The location is at 1903 Pecan Street. It is right north of the railroad tracks. It has frontage on 3 streets, Pecan, Hawthorne, and Jefferson, which is actually a dead-end street at that location. The existing zoning is Single Family 7, which requires a CUP for any church that wants to expand or make changes to the property. In the new code, it would be a place type civic space. So the applicant has submitted a conceptual site plan and some conceptual elevations. So they show here how they would add on to the front of the property and to the back of the property and with parking around the edges. This kind of diagrams where the additions will be. So the foyer will be to the front. I'll actually add kind of an overhang with a stoop that would match with the new proposed place type codes. And then the addition will be at the back and respecting all the existing setbacks in the code. Here's the conceptual elevations that show the addition onto the front and the rear that will match the existing facade of the structure. In the code, section 33.2 of the zoning ordinance, it has a series of conditions they have to meet. One, that the use is harmonious and compatible with the existing uses. Existing land uses in this area are single family. Future land use plan designates this as neighborhood residential. And churches are allowed within these districts that with a CUP as long as they're mitigating any nuisances. In this case, they'd just be adding some space that would be accessory to the main church use. The religious uses are allowed with a conditional use permit as long as they mitigate these impacts. The nature of the use is reasonable. This church has been in this location for about 40 years, so it's already an existing use in this area. It would just be adding some additional space. Any negative impact on the surrounding areas would be mitigated. Staff feels that they are meeting that with their design of the site. And then staff is not recommending any additional criteria. So recommendation is to hold public hearing and make a recommendation to City Council, and the applicant is here if you have any questions of them.
One question I have is they'll be adding a lot of impervious ground cover?
Yes.
And they have a paved parking lot?
Yes.
Their drainage plans, okay?
They'll have to submit that as part of their site development plan. So this is the first step, is to be allowed to do the expansion. That's why it's a conceptual site plan. And they'll actually then have to submit a fully engineered site plan that will address all those issues.
Okay. Anyone else have a question?
Just clarification, under the new code where this whole lot is civic, would this be allowed by right?
Yes.
Where this addition would not require a CUP whatsoever?
No, it would just have to follow.
Any other questions? At this time, I'll open public hearing, and we do have one person who wishes to speak. Ms. Mary Butler.
You did a great job for us.
Ain't nobody shaking their heads.
So I'm Mary Butler, and I actually live at 435 McDonald Lane West. I live in Cedar Creek, but I'm the pastor of the church. And I say that, you know, what we do for our community is we do a lot in our community, and our space is so limited that we cannot do some of the programs that we want to do. As a matter of fact, we were doing an after-school program. We had to kind of scale it back, like all the way back, because we didn't have space for the kids after school. So we do quite a bit in our neighborhood. And this space that we have is just not about all of our classrooms, because we don't have any. It is also, we're trying to build a space for our community so we can do community gatherings and so forth. So that is our whole, thrust behind what we're trying to do. It's definitely for Sunday school and to get classroom, but it's also to do computer labs and some other stuff for our community.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're very welcome.
All right. I have no other persons signed up to speak. At this point, I'll close the public hearing, and I will ask for motion.
I'll make a motion for approve the recommendation on conditional use permit for the expansion of Friendship Bible Baptist Church.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Congratulations. Go get them. All right. Is there anyone here to speak on any issue?
We do have both of the plats are both here
Okay,
too. So
okay, all right.
if you want to go
Then
back.
let's go to the plats. So, item 3C.
So,
Consider action to approve Young Subdivision Block 6, Lots 1 through 4, a replat of Young Subdivision Block 6 located at 1605 and 1609 Chambers Street within the city limits of Bastrop, Texas, as shown in Attachment 1.
So the request before you is to create a replat of the existing Block 6 of the Young subdivision. This plat was originally recorded in 1942. They did them in blocks. They didn't divide them up further into lots at the time. So this is requesting to divide the property into 4 lots. At one point, the lot has been deed divided, I think, through different sales into 2 lots. So this will fix that issue as well as create 2 additional lots. So it'll be 4 lots total. You can see the school is across the street. And this is in a live-work area of town, so zoning-wise, they're allowed to do a mix of residential and kind of smaller commercial uses in a current form-based code. In the new code, this will go to P4. They have 4 lots. Started to change the slide. They range in size from about 7,000 square feet up to 9,800 square feet. So it's some still fairly good-sized lots for this area. 2 existing houses will stay in the 2 lots to the west, and they'll have 2 new lots to the east. There is an unopened right-of-way to the east of that that's not planned to be constructed at this time. In compliance with the local government code, section 212, in the last legislative session, they actually changed the process for residential replats. A public hearing is no longer required, and we are required to notify everyone in the surrounding area within 15 days of the action, with the action and what the existing zoning on the property will be. That's a change the legislature made this last year. Yeah, the decision. So if it was subdivided or not. So. This is in compliance with the amended Code of Ordinances, Chapter 10. That was just amended on August 27th, and staff has reviewed, along with engineering staff, the plat, and it meets all of our regulations. So at this point now, this is when you guys get to approve the plat. So with the changes in the code, the Planning and Zoning Commission is the last step. It does not go on to City Council now. So we would recommend consider an action to approve the Young subdivision replat.
Is there a motion?
Motion to approve as is.
Second?
Second.
On our very first one, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passed unanimously. All right. Moving right along. Item 3D. Consider action to approve the Pecan Park Section 2 final plat. Final plat. Being 79.627 acres out of the Mosaic Russo Survey Abstract 56, located south of Rimrock Court and the extension of Childers Drive to the western property line within the city limits of Bastrop, Texas, as shown in Attachment 1.
So the request for you is a final plat for Section 2 of the Pecan Park Residential Subdivision. You just saw the preliminary plat for Section 1B, 2, and 7 fairly recently, I think at your last meeting. And that was approved at council just recently. So this is the final plat that follows up with that. Typically under the new process, the final plats would come in after all of the infrastructure has been built. This one was kind of in the middle of our process already when the code changed. Typically the final plat would go to council for approval, and then they could start construction. So we're kind of following that with getting the approval for the final plat so they can go start their construction plans under kind of the old process. But in the future, you'll only see these at the end of the construction process. So this area is...
Jennifer, when you say construction, you mean the infrastructure?
Yes,
or?
the infrastructure. So in the future, all the infrastructure, streets, water lines, and all that will be put in, and the final plat will just be the final document that before it goes and gets recorded. Yeah, we're kind of in the middle of the process. Before this had to be done a lot earlier in the process. So we were already almost to the end when we changed the process. So this is the area. Childers Drive will continue to be extended into Section 2, and this also includes all of the floodway open space that will be to the south. This is part of the Pecan Park Residential Zoning Plan Development District that was adopted in 2015 and amended in 2017. You can see this area. It has 115 single-family lots along Childers Street, and then along the river, you'll have this side along to the east will be continue to be maintained by the HOA, and then everything this direction will actually be deeded to the city as open space and river access. So this will extend Childers Drive to the west to connect with Hamilton Pool Lane, which will be in the future section 1B. It's 115 single-family lots. They're a mix of 40-foot wide lots and 50-foot wide lots. There will also be a 1.2-acre site that is the Homeowners Association Common Space Amenity Center lot. And then the open space that the HOA will maintain will be another a little over 17 acres, and the city will have 38 acres of open space. There's a limited development capacity in that area because it is part of the floodway. It's not just floodplain, it's actually where the river floods to when it floods. So the developer is doing a natural trail and with some picnic tables and things that are allowed by FEMA to be in that area. Staff has reviewed this and recommends that it meets all of our requirements and the approved preliminary plat, and recommends approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission. And the applicant is here if you have any questions.
Are there any questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve as is.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second. All in favor? Say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay. So, we're down to 3G. Matt, you're back.
Yep. So we went over this. Item 3G is an amendment to the Bastrop Comprehensive Plan and Chapter 6 of the Comprehensive Plan for the Gridded Street Network. So we did go through that. Well, actually, I apologize. I'm doing that for nothing. It's in the other
You're in the wrong
PowerPoint.
presentation.
Yeah, but we did go over that. So as a part of the Bastrop Building Block Code and being fiscally sustainable, being walkable, and all that stuff, we realized that we needed to amend the thoroughfare plan. And since it's embedded in the comprehensive plan, it needs to come to you all before it goes to council. For that reason, it's before you tonight. But it would be the Gridded Street Network system, and then the amendments to the actual master transportation plan, which were provided to you in your packet.
Are there any questions?
So I've gone through it and looked at it. I just want to clarify. Are there any major thoroughfares that were changed or altered or connections? I think it was just kind of like a rearranging.
There are definitely more connections, but I wouldn't say major thoroughfares were.
We didn't remove anything.
No, the major thoroughfares will still act as our state highways in those corridors. Sure.
Any other questions before I open the public hearing? This is a public hearing. Does anyone wish to be heard on this item? If not, hello. If not, I'll close the public hearing and entertain a motion.
Motion or recommendation for the amendments to the comprehensive plan, transportation, and the transportation master plan.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. All right. Okay, item 3H, public hearing and consider action to recommend the creation of the Airedale Historic District for inclusion in the Bastrop Building Block Code B3 in order to allow the city to review exterior building materials and forward to the October 8, 2019 City Council meeting.
So again, we covered this in the last presentation. It's the Airedale Overlay District as it pertains to the B3 codes. I think we went through why it's necessary. It's only allowing us to do in the future what we're doing today, which is take a look at building materials on new permits. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have on it.
I have a question.
Yes.
Sometimes when we're developing in historic districts, we consider what's called neighborhood character, or contributing structures that don't necessarily have a landmark status or historical designation, but they contribute to the character of the neighborhood. Is there a language that we're putting in there that would protect that, so that, you know, even though we're increasing the size of this district? Right now, I think, am I correct, that the historic district is kind of smaller than it is?
That's
being
correct.
Proposed? So now we're going to widen that. By doing that, I understand we're going to kind of look at the materials, which I think is very important, especially considering where we are at next to a forest. And that's very important that we think about fire safety. Are we also considering the structure's contribution to the historic character?
So at this time, it's only proposed if you're in a national. Well, let me. My apologies, I don't have it memorized. Designated historic landmark, recorded Texas historic landmark, state archaeological landmark, or included in the National Register of Historic Places. Those are the only times you'd have to get a certificate of appropriateness. All other times, it's just regulating building materials and it's staff approval.
Okay, so my question is specifically that you were saying if you have a building that has those designations, you have to get a certificate of appropriateness.
That's correct.
If you don't, and you're right next to one that does, sometimes they take and you still want to know that that structure is contributing to the fabric or the neighborhood, so that you want to review that at some level. That's what I'm asking about.
Yeah, so the materials would still stand, but the architecture or certificate of appropriateness, as it's written, would not be required.
So is there a way to
you could make
watch
a
that?
you could
You would
make
still
a
have the pattern book
recommendation.
to go by to give indications of the pattern book, but I think more than that.
Yeah. It's not a regulatory pattern book though. It's design guidelines, but they're not mandatory, to be clear.
So you could do a modern structure with the right materials next to a very historic house.
Yes.
So
Yes, you could. Unless
historic
it's
district.
unless it's in the national district, you could not.
That's right.
But if it's outside of the nationally designated district, you could.
I only bring that up because I've had experience with that. If you're developing a home in a historic district, any home, even if it doesn't have a landmark, you still have to think about how it impacts the rest of the neighborhood, even if you don't have a historic landmark. And what I'm reading and what you're proposing is we're doing away with that. Is that correct?
State that one more time.
Correct. Currently, right now, Texas Historical Commission, if you are developing or you're remodeling a home in a historic district, even if you don't have a landmark designation, the city, some cities will want to look at it and have a review process to not just look at the materials, but the contributing character of what you're doing.
You're saying some municipalities?
I haven't met one that isn't, but
Okay.
my understanding is a lot of them do that. So they look at that and they look at more than just the materials.
Yes. I mean that is it can be done, but my understanding of the way the code's written, it would not require that.
That's right.
You could make a motion to include that as part of this, but as it's written, that is not the way it's written.
What would, and I'm not trying to give us that task, but I'd like the staff to at least look at that. A contributing character is what I'm going to call it, and I'll make the motion. Contributing character.
I just wanted to clarify, Matt, this is creating a new district. It is not taking over the historic district that
No,
exists
that's
today.
right. It's the Iredell.
So the Iredell map is going to have it'll be its own overlay boundary, but the current historic district that was established is staying the way it is, and the regulations as they are today will stay the way they are today.
So there's two separate sections in the code. One deals with the existing historic district, and one deals with the Iredell district.
If you're right up against that historic district, then you could not have contributing characteristics, right? I'm just worried.
If you're not within the existing district, then the new regulations of the Iredell would apply, and those only apply to building materials.
Right, then I understand.
As it's written.
And you may have said this, but I can't remember. How was this decided? Like this runs from all the way back to Laurel Street, all north, Mesquite Street. So how was the area decided?
The area was decided, and I apologize, I think it's in your packet.
Like 100 years ago.
1920 map.
Yeah, in 1920, there was a map drawn by George Iredell. The city hired him to come do a survey of the town and lay the town at that time out to farm lots and building blocks. And so based on that, staff took that original map that was done in 1920 and just overlaid that over the city as it is, and that became the boundaries of the district.
So I guess my question is, why is it just now being discovered? Was this lost in translation somewhere?
No, we always knew the map existed. The reason behind it is to be able to regulate building materials within that historic overlay, because the state legislation says we cannot do it unless it checks a couple of things, one of those being a historic district. So by going back to the 1920 map, it's 100 years old, and applying this overlay district, you can regulate building materials within that district.
You just kind of had to revisit it because
It wasn't previously codified anywhere.
Well, we
It's a legislation that was.
it's a legislation that dictated. So we were, before the legislation, we were able to regulate building materials, and we had been for some time. When the legislation took that away, this came up that was potentially an option to be able to continue what we're doing today, and that's the reason for moving it forward.
I'm glad you clarified that, because during the break, had several people come up to me, and I hadn't mentioned before today's meeting.
Yeah, it originally wasn't in the B3 code, but given the recent legislation and given the things that they allow for, that it was brought up.
Has that been discussed in a council meeting yet?
Yes.
It has.
Yes.
I want to add a little bit on what you mentioned, but kind of put it in a little different context. If you build a house on the coast, on the coast of Texas, you're dealing with the weather there, and you have to meet a higher level of material standard. Right now, what they've basically said is you don't. So you can build, like Matt said, OSB or some kind of just cheap material, maybe even metal. It's going to rot, it's going to get rusted, but no one can tell you you can't do it now. Before, municipalities were able to say, no, you can't do that, because they wanted to raise the quality of housing, but that's been taken away. So by doing this, by creating this district, the city of Bastrop is saying, no, we're going to protect what we have here, and we're basically saying, because we have, you have to use some certain kind of material. So I think that's a good idea.
And also, Commissioner Lee, it went to the Historic Landmarks Commission previously, and they unanimously recommended approval of it.
Pablo, do you want to make a motion?
I'll make the motion. Yeah, go. Yes, I make the motion.
I have to open a public hearing.
Yes, we do have to hold a public hearing.
I'm getting ahead of myself. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone who wishes to be heard on this item? If not, I'm closing the public hearing and we'll entertain a motion. Go, Pablo.
Based on what we discussed and the fact that we're still going to be protecting our historic district, I make a motion to accept that staff recommendation.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Passes unanimously. Woohoo! Item 4, update.
There it is. Sorry. I don't have any updates on items that they took action on. I do want to point for just some information that October is National Community Planning Month. And so at the council meeting, the last council meeting, the mayor read a proclamation designated as National Planning Month for the city of Bastrop, recognizing all the work that elected officials, appointed officials, staff, and others do for the community. So just point of clarification, or just, informational. Y'all were recognized I guess that was Tuesday at council, so congratulations.
And does anyone have anything that requests that be put on the agenda next time? I would like to take this time to thank Matt Jones for the hard work that he has done since he's been here. He came in the middle of a tornado and saw us through moratoriums and B3s and B1s and 2s and rights and rewrites and rodeos and all that good stuff. And he is leaving us. And he is going to go back to being a family man up with his wife up in Mansfield. So we want to thank you, Matt. It's been a pleasure working with you. We hate to see you go, but we know why, and we applaud you for that. And
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it. It's been an honor working with y'all, like I said earlier, and thank you for those kind words. Appreciate it.
Item 5.
Make a motion to adjourn.
All in favor? Let's go. Woohoo! Good job, everybody.